Okay, we are now live.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome everybody to this East Lansing City Council meeting held today on October 13th, 7 p.m. Before we get into this, I'm going to pass it over to our city attorney to talk through the recent House bill that was passed today and the Supreme Court decision that was in relation to virtual meetings. Mr. Helmier?
Sure. So I'll deal with the Supreme Court decision first. The Supreme Court came out with a couple of different opinions, both of which actually gave immediate effect to its prior decision, holding that the governor did not have authority to enact the executive orders under the current law. The bigger question then becomes some of the remedial provisions that were included in those executive orders, and the legislature dealt with one of those today under the Open Meetings Act. And so the Senate Bill 1108 passed the Senate and then was considered in the House today. The House had a substitute bill. There are a couple wording changes, but that went to Ways and Means, unanimously recommended it, and the House voted in favor of that. So I think that we are likely to see that bill enacted into law, which will allow the public bodies to continue to meet virtually through the end of the year. There were a couple of amendments that were proposed to extend that, but as of right now, it would extend through December 31st of this year for any reason, and then all of next year, but there are certain qualifications then into next year, one of which would be if there is a local state of emergency that required you to meet virtually or electronically. So at this time, I don't think there's any reason for the city council to change the manner in which it is holding meetings. That legislation also authorizes all of the meetings that you've had since April 30th as well. So it's got both a retroactive effect and a prospective effect when that is adopted and finally becomes law, which I anticipate will be shortly.
Yeah, and I got off the phone with the governor's office earlier today, and they informed me that they expect to have that bill signed very, very quickly here. But Mr. Helmier, what does that mean for today's meeting?
So there are a couple different things. One is there are certainly differences of opinions with respect to virtual meetings. I tend to believe, although I will admit it's not shared by everybody, that there's nothing in the Open Meetings Act that precludes you from meeting electronically the way we have been meeting. Others read the Open Meetings Act to require a physical place where a quorum of the board must convene. But the Open Meetings Act isn't necessarily drafted in such a narrow manner. It defines a meeting in which a quorum of the board is convened, but whether that means a physical place or a place such as Zoom or on the internet for purposes of conducting a public meeting remains unclear, at least as I read the Open Meetings Act. And I think the reasoning behind the interpretation that some have taken sort of is not supportable, in as much as there are people out there that would argue that you have to meet as a quorum in a physical place. That is, you have to gather as a quorum, say at City Hall, but that you could exclude the public from that in-person physical presence at City Hall. So imagine, if you will, you have a quorum of the City Council at City Hall meeting, and then you allow the public only to attend by, say, telephone conference. There are multiple people and entities that have argued that. But when you really look at the reasoning behind it, it really doesn't make too much sense. I would argue that you can see all of the members of the City Council on this meeting. There is a quorum present. It's open, it's transparent, and allows two-way transmission between the public and the City Council. Whereas if you advocate for the other, members of the public may not be able to see council members. The second thing is, and there are two other public policy points I would argue, and one was noted at the House meeting today, where public participation by video meetings has actually increased and not decreased. That is, it's more accessible to the public. And finally, I would argue that people who attend meetings, whether it be council members or members of the public, should not have to choose between their safety and well-being in attending a meeting and participating in local government. And it puts the city in an untenable position because we never know how many members of the public may show up. So you're in a position of having to either possibly violate MDHH's order restricting the number of people attending the meeting, or the Open Meetings Act by turning away the public from meetings that would have otherwise been open to the public, but for the restrictions in those orders. So on balance, I think that, and I think the legislature has recognized this as well, public participation is enhanced by these meetings. These meetings certainly show and evidence a quorum of the board. They are recorded. They're two-way transmissions so the public can participate. And so I would recommend that you move forward as you have been.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. We have one action item, I believe, today that might be passed. Are we at risk of passing that sort of item right now as a full body meeting virtually? And if we are, and if that were to call into question, what would be our next steps going forward?
So if it was called into question, there's a short timeline to invalidate decisions made at meetings, either 60 or 30 days, depending on the nature of it. Here, if we're discussing the ordinance at issue, then it's a 60-day statute of limitations. But by then, I would suggest that the legislature likely will be wrapped up. The governor will likely have signed the bill, and it's going to authorize all these meetings anyways. Even if it didn't, you can reenact that meeting to do it over again. And so you always have that ability under the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, thank you. Any other council members have questions on that item? I just wanted to get out of the way before we conducted the rest of this meeting. Great, seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll? Thank you, Mr. Honger.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Babcock,
Present.
Councilmember Bacon,
Present.
Councilmember Watson,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg,
Here.
Mayor Stevens.
Here. Thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion on that?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Watson, seconded by Councilmember Bacon. Any discussion? Great. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Great. Our next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the regular council special meeting of October 6th, 2020. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
I'll move
Approve.
Okay, it's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Councilmember Bacon. All those in favor, or any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Wonderful. Our next item on the agenda is communications. First is an announcement that all written communications received by council are posted on the online agenda packet. And I always just like to say this, but the cutoff time for that is around 5 p.m. today. So if you submitted something that was after that time, it might not be included in this communication, but it definitely will be included in the next communication. If you don't see something that you did submit on there, please just let me know. Sometimes folks submit things to council members individually, they don't make it onto the full board. So that sometimes is a little bit of confusion, but I'm very, very happy to assist with that and make sure things are on the agenda. Our next item on the agenda is communications from the audience. I will hand that over to Emily to let folks that are in the call speak.
Caller with the phone number ending in 970, you are now permitted to address council.
Caller ending in 970, you might have to hit *6 to unmute yourself. Caller with a phone number starting in 517, ending in 907. If you hit *6, you should be able to speak to the full council. You just need to unmute yourself. I still see that you're muted on my screen. Okay, Emily, why don't we go back to that caller right at the end there? We'll move on to the next caller for right now.
Caller with the phone number ending in 534, you are now permitted to address council.
Then again, caller ending in 5. Oh, there you go. I see you unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Ann Hill at 685 Buteo. I'd like to comment on tonight's agenda item on strategic priorities, as this is one of the early stages of the fiscal year 2022 budget planning process and 5-year plan. It's a very fundamental part, and I'm curious about a few things. When we look back at 5-year plans over the past decade, is there a consistent direction, and did we follow through on the direction of the outer years? Where are we taking the city of East Lansing? For several years, we had 5 categories of strategic priorities: good governance, diverse, safe, strong community, environmental sustainability, vibrant economy and development, and enhanced transportation and infrastructure. And the 6th of recreation and cultural opportunities appears to have been added for the period ending August 2020. I counted 36 programs which we are using to support those priorities. It seems as if everything is a priority. Therefore, nothing will truly be a priority. My question: when there are conflicts between potential outcomes of different commissions or departments, which has to happen frequently? Who or where does the prioritization or balancing occur? Example: good governance would say it would be prudent to be prudent with the taxpayers' money, but environmental sustainability may say purchase green vehicles, which may cost more. Where does that conflict get resolved? Example: vibrant economy and development encourages using TIFs to bring in large developments, but good governance would question on the risk of deals falling through and leaving the taxpayer with a higher burden. St. Anne's Lofts, Avondale Square, and Center City District come to mind. Example: environmental sustainability would say established trees are great, but recreation and cultural opportunities push for bulldozing a large swath of trees along Lake Lansing Road by Tower Road and replace them with a 10-foot wide strip of pavement a quarter-mile long by White Hills Park. Who made the decision on which priority was higher? Example: does the library even need approval from the Environmental Sustainability Commission to cut down several mature trees and add even more concrete to the area? Where do the debates take place about retaining the character and ambiance of boutiques, festivals, bars and restaurants, and other types of small businesses, or replacing them with big box stores that are just like any other city or town throughout the country, stamping out the very things that have made East Lansing unique and have drawn thousands of visitors for decades? We seem to have a constant churning of people through leadership positions, both elected and staff. Gone are the days when a council member served 8, 12, or more years on council. I feel for the city manager whose performance appraisal and compensation is dependent upon fulfilling the behests of this ever-changing body of elected officials and their biannual ever-changing priorities. We have had several key staff and director positions turn over in the past decade as well. Please do not misunderstand. In no way am I faulting the new people that have come to sit in these positions. Their willingness to serve is very much appreciated, but it is the difficult truth of the situation that we find ourselves in. I am simply raising concerns on my observations as a taxpayer and a citizen of the city of East Lansing. As we prepare to enter into these next 2 years of uncertainty with our city finances, I hope that we are being intentional in where we take the city. For the last decade or two, it also seems like we are chasing the infamous grant dollars, and whichever ones get awarded, that is where the priority that we will use for the moment. The same holds true with bonds. We seem to be in a situation where the tail is wagging the dog and not the other way around. I think East Lansing is at a crossroads. Do we want to be just like every other small city, or do we want to be unique? It will be important not only in what we say the priorities are, but our actions in what we do that will show where we are actually going to take the city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ann. I want to respond to a couple of the points that you made, and then I might pass it over to the city manager to talk about general priorities. So, I read through your email earlier today where you explained some of the same items, and I wanted to touch on just a couple of things that you talked about. So you had mentioned somewhat of the dichotomy between good governance and environmental stability, and the example that you used is purchasing green vehicles, and which is more prudent. Prudent defines really just acting with or showing care and thought for the future. And I would say that that's not necessarily in conflict with a green agenda for the city. We do need to think with care. And quite frankly, I'd look at, some steps that we've taken, like our wastewater treatment plant, big investments in terms of taxpayer dollars, whether that be utilized through grants or our own money here, that will save us money over time. And so I would say that those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You can do both in certain situations, although I do agree with you that sometimes those might be in conflict, and that's something that I think is a decision that's made on the council level when we either approve or don't approve a spending in a certain capacity. But I would say that even with all of those priorities, the vast majority are not in conflict with each other. When you're talking about good governance and when you're talking about environmental stability, I really see those as one and the same. I do think we need to invest in our future. I do think we need to invest in future energies. And quite frankly, it'll save taxpayers money in the long term. And we've seen that time and time again. So, there's a couple other things that you talked about when you were saying, boutique shops and replacing them with big box stores. I'll tell you right now, one of the biggest misconceptions about, a city council, and we do have a huge effect on businesses, and obviously that's taken hold, during this COVID crisis, during times of construction, right? That, where construction has actually caused a lot of hardship for businesses. But at the end of the day, we don't control, what businesses decide to rent facilities within the city of East Lansing, and we don't kick out businesses that, we just because we want, another big box store. And, I'll tell you very flat out, I have never been part of a conversation like that. And I don't imagine I'd have any control over it if I did. It's kind of the same argument where, we obviously set the tone, we set the zoning code, and we set expectations. So, if we have a part to play in, some of these boutique shops not being here and some of the bigger box stores coming in, I agree with you because we do. But we don't have control over the individual. And so, when a developer comes to us with a proposal, I sometimes get the phrase, well, why would the city council even consider this, right? And the truth is, we have to consider it because they own the property. And if they're proposing something within the zoning code, or even if it's not within the zoning code, we're going to consider it. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to pass it, but it does mean we're going to consider it. And so, there's a couple of dichotomies in there, but I do think that, when you're talking about priorities, what we're really setting as goals for the city. And I think it's a further way that the council can define what we want to see our staff working on for the year to come. George, did you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
So I really think that the priorities have been very consistent over the past 20 years that I've been in the city. You mentioned 5 priorities. The new 6 priorities are really a division of sustainable infrastructure divided into enhanced transportation infrastructure and recreation and cultural opportunities. So that's really all that happened. Aside from that, these are really universal things that the council and the staff and the city want to march towards to make a better organization. Good governance, a well-functioning city government, vibrant economy. We want the economy to be strong, people to have jobs, employment, all of those things that support a good tax base. Strong, safe, diverse communities was strong, safe neighborhoods. We want great places where people can live. And environmental sustainability, obviously the mayor talked about. We want a sustainable city into the future. So all of these things are really consistent, and really the council gets the opportunity to affirm these directions and then make all of the underlying, you mentioned 36 programs, I'll take that, I hadn't necessarily counted them, but 36 programs that look at this and say, what does this mean to this council? What does this mean to the organization? How do we move the city forward in all of these areas? And to say we're working on a lot of different things and that means we're doing good at nothing, I disagree. We've got hundreds of staff people. We can do a lot of different things at the same time. So I think all these priorities help to move the community, the organization forward on a regular basis. It's been consistent, it's consistent direction. And I think it also focuses the staff's attention on what the council wants us to do and lets us complete those goals. And we've completed, I can go back to years and years of these priorities and see lots of great things completed. So that's probably all I've mentioned about that. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. How many other council?
If I could, if I could make one more comment, as a taxpayer, I look at it from the standpoint of we don't have an infinite amount of money that we can contribute to city activities. So that's where I'm coming from. We now have the income tax. We've got the franchise fee that went to the Board of Water and Light. Well, what they've done is essentially come back and given us higher rates. When you look on your bill, it says it's for the franchise fee. Yeah. So as taxpayers, please don't expect that we have an infinite amount of money. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying we've got so much. You've got the pensions. You've got this whole what's going to happen financially. Look at downtown. Look at the parking. I'm just saying we've got that coming in front of us. So I'm throwing a word of caution out.
Thank you.
That's my purpose.
Appreciate it. Any other council member want to respond? Yeah, go ahead, Jesse, and then Lisa. Jesse, you're muted.
I muted myself when I thought I was unmuting myself. I just wanted to speak to the question of grants. I think Ms. Hill's, I forget the exact phrasing that she used, but something about the grants that we get is where we place our priorities. And I've just, having been involved with that grant process, not so much at the city level because I'm very new here, but seeing the way that the city used DNR trust fund grants to match county millage dollars to bring money into the city essentially gave, I haven't added it up lately, but it's well in excess of $500,000 of parks and infrastructure improvements that did not come out of our general fund in any way. Usually in order to get those grants, we have to match that money, which would mean general fund dollars. But in this case, we were able to take state money and match it with county money and meet one of our strategic priorities. So I think it's not so much that we are chasing grants and then deciding that the ones that we get are where our priorities lie. We are identifying our priorities and matching up grants that match them. So I just wanted to give kind of a hey-ho to our Parks and Recreation Department for their strong work in that strategic priority area.
Yep. Councilmember Babcock.
Great. Ms. Hill, I'd just like to thank you for calling in. I don't always agree with you, and I'm sure I don't always, or perhaps often, or maybe even ever, do what you'd like, but I really value your analysis, particularly your news analysis, and your numbers analysis, and I just want to thank you. I appreciate your insights. That's all.
Great. Thank you. Emily, would you mind letting in the next caller?
Caller with the phone number ending in 963, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, this is Alice Dreger, 621 Sunset Lane. I was going to talk about the Evergreen properties, but just following up on some of what Ann Hill was talking about, it's true, Mayor, that you don't decide which businesses come in and which leave, but decisions about development, road closures, construction periods absolutely affect local businesses.
Absolutely.
Mackerel Sky named specifically the problems with Center City as the reason they closed. Twitchell's, where I went for 20 years, talked to me about how they were crushed by the Center City road closures and effectively couldn't recover once the pandemic hit. So, and Target coming in, we know will probably have a massive effect on Spartan Spirits. So there's no question the decisions you're making do directly impact local businesses. I think it is a pleasant thing we tell ourselves that going green will ultimately save money. It's not always true. If you read Eli, you will find a report by Emily Joan Elliott that looked at the green vehicle purchases in East Lansing. And for a series of them where we paid a lot extra for having green vehicle purchases that are SUVs, we would have to keep those vehicles 12 to 13 years for them to pay back. But the city is currently recycling vehicles at the rate of about 5 to 6 years. So they'll get rid of those vehicles before we make any savings on those vehicles. Those will ultimately cost us money. But what I really wanted to talk about was the Evergreen properties. I wanted to give you some background, but I'm not going to have enough time to do that. I hope the staff gives you the full background as much as they can on these properties. I live 2 blocks from them and I've reported on them for almost 10 years, so I'm intimately familiar with them. One thing you need to know is that the debt on them can actually be paid of the DDA millages. It would mean the DDA can't do other things, but maybe it's time for us to recognize we can't have all the pretty things when we've screwed ourselves into a lot of debt. So you don't really have to rush into a deal and go into a deal in order to pay off the debt. There are other ways to do it, namely with the DDA millages, and I confirmed that with city staff. Secondly, when the River Caddis project proposal came in, they were planning to take on the cost of parking themselves, put it on their own land, and they also implied that they were not going to take all of the TIF money and use that as the way to purchase the property. But now they've basically pulled what I would consider a bait and switch and decided to foist the problem of parking onto us, which is a massive expense, and also to basically get the property for free by using TIF to pay for it. If that's the way we're going to approach it, I would say go back to an RFP, because we could have some pretty exciting projects. Yes, office space there would be great. Don't forget, MSUFCU doesn't have tenants yet for their 2 empty floors. I think there's reason to believe with over 40,000 square feet of office space available already in the downtown area of East Lansing, it's going to be challenging to fill that office space. The developer may not care if you basically give them the land for free, but what we don't need is big vacant space. We could have something really great there. We could have senior housing. We could have a new space for helping hands. We could have something that actually provides perhaps owner-occupied housing or more low to moderate income housing. I'm very concerned that what the city is thinking of doing is building another parking garage that we can't afford, but most importantly, building it apparently on lot 8, which would stick a parking garage right next to the windows of the people living in the low to moderate income housing being built by DRW at 341 Evergreen. That would be just simply obnoxious. I can't imagine us wanting as a community to do that to people who are living in low to moderate income housing. So one thing I'm hoping doesn't happen this time, as keeps happening to the DDA and keeps happening to city staff, I believe very unfairly, is last minute proposals and last minute contract offers from developers where basically everybody has to process it in 48 hours and vote on it the next day. This gives the public no chance to go over the documents where many of us typically find problems. It also gives no opportunity meaningfully for the city staff and for the DDA to have the time to really go over the proposal and have a meaningful discussion before they vote to yet another deal and yet another exclusive contract. We need to stop making the same mistake over and over again. We did this in 2009 with Scott Chappelle. We did it then with Royal Oaxacas. We did it then with sending out this RFP and basically having a situation where we got only one project back that then switched what it is they're really offering us. We really have to think about this more carefully, and I believe, think about what we really want to have at that space. That is a unique, bizarre, difficult space to build on, but it's also a wonderful space. It's right near People's Church. It is right near the park.
30 seconds remaining.
And finally, thanks. Finally, I know it's popular to say we should build parking for the church. I know the church feels it needs more parking. However, I would say, as somebody who's paid $140,000 roughly more in taxes to the city of East Lansing than People's Church has, I don't think that we have to prioritize their parking needs. The church has literally paid zero in taxes to the city of East Lansing. Think about what the rest of the taxpayers need in terms of what we really need at that space. There's a parking garage that's new that's a half a block away that's underutilized already. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Emily, am I letting in the next caller?
Okay, caller with the phone number starting in 616 and ending in 954. You are now permitted to address council.
Okay, I think I unmuted this time. Yep. This is Nicole Biber. I wanted to call and thank you all last week, and thanks to Kathy DeChambeau and everyone else for all their work on the, I guess it'd be the sustainability resolution. So that passed last week. It was very good to hear it. I think it was an important moment for the city. I really appreciate the comments from council saying that the environment is, you know, basically what we are all kind of standing on, and that's in a really literal way. It's a really important baseline for cities to do this and communities to do this. For example, right now, it's almost the closing comment for the proposed tunnel to keep Enbridge with their Line 5 going. That's a threat to all of us. And the more that smaller communities like this, and then also our county with Ingham saying there's the climate emergency, the more we do that, the more leeway there's going to, or leverage there's going to be when these large decisions are made, that it's, you know, beyond just the, what they consider is the small matter of the land that has to be cleared to make this thing happen. It's a far-reaching these decisions are. And like I said, it's really important leverage to show, like, oh, here we are in mid-Michigan, but we have stakes in this too, in the continued health of our waters, and saying that that's the direction we want to take. I know there's a lot of worry with money, and part of the problem that we're encountering is because, well, one, that's sort of been the be-all end-all measurement for far too long of a gross domestic product, when you have so many people who are struggling to breathe because of the ongoing influence of fossil fuels and what we might consider business as usual. But thinking in terms of legacy, I'm with young people all the time, and they're very worried. And so when we see leadership, on saying that this is important that we make this change, and to start getting to where we're planning for it and saying that's what our baseline is, I think it can be really powerful, and it can get to where we're thinking, through a new lens that will benefit all of us, because there is no benefit to ignoring the fact of our dependence on the earth and the water. So as for a unique space, hey, one in a park or a garden space, I'm a bit of a dreamer that way, but it might be amazing. It'd probably be a really great thing. And while we're at it, maybe all these new developments can get some green roofs going. I'm not even kidding. Okay, thanks so much, y'all. I appreciate your work. Bye.
Take it, Paul.
The next person on the line is Layla Askar. You are now permitted to address council.
Layla, you might have to unmute yourself if you can hear us. I still see you as muted on my screen. If you don't want to speak, you can just say pass. That's okay as well.
Pass.
Great. Emily?
Okay, so caller with the phone number ending in 970, you are now permitted to address council.
Hello, my name is Sally Cribbett. I live at 220 Mack Avenue, the City Center, Unit 414. And tonight I'd like to comment on masks and the fine. In the past, in my previous career, I was highly regulated. And in fact, I was the compliance champion. And what I used to start most of my meetings out with was, without accountability, you would not have compliance. And without compliance, you were going to put patients at risk. And what I would like to say to the city council is that it doesn't matter what executive order you have, how high the fine is, or what the mandate is. Without enforcement, you're not going to have compliance. And without compliance, we are not going to protect ourselves and the citizens of East Lansing by simply wearing a mask. And it's been evident to me in my experiences. I have lived downtown for 18 years. I'm going to give you two examples of what I've seen recently. For some reason, there are runners who feel compelled to run up MAC on the sidewalk without a mask at 12 or 1 o'clock during a high density area. And they've laughed when they see the rest of us running into the street to avoid them. On campus, I've noticed runners wearing masks, but why, as a runner, because you're probably in better shape than the rest of us, do you have to run in the most dense area in downtown East Lansing at a peak time without a mask? During the 14-day quarantine issued for MSU students, I have on video, a block away, a beer pong table with students lined all the way around it, shoulder to shoulder, not wearing a mask. And when they saw the old lady with the golden retriever taking their video, they proceeded to chase me down MHC, demanding I give them my name for her attorney. Well, I consulted my attorney, Mark Rebner, who informed me that no one has an implied sense of privacy in your front yard. And this was during the 14-day quarantine. So I would say to you and all of you, first of all, I thank you for serving during this very challenging time. Unlike some members of the city council that retreated, those of you who are still standing and serving, you are facing the challenge. And I appreciate that, especially our mayor, because of your age and your experience. I've seen what you've done in regards with the students, and I agree with you, Mayor Stevens. The vast majority of students and young people and otherwise are trying to comply, but it only takes one infected person running down the sidewalk or in my building. I have now had the experience of coming home and seeing yellow notices posted at the city center on every door that COVID is in our building. So now, and quite honestly, I have been wearing a mask since March when the first 2 patients were reported because of my own health history and my risk. So what I'm here to say is we are beyond education. I've never seen so many people try so hard. We're now at the point where there needs to be enforcement, because if you don't have accountability, you're not going to have compliance. And if you don't have compliance, one infected person can infect the rest of us. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Sally. I'll comment on this a little bit. So I'm obviously going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to business item 4.2. But we've been working hand in hand with the county officials as well as Michigan State University on different methods of educating folks and attempting to really come to people where they are in terms of compliance with these public health orders that are in place to save people's lives. And I've said this time and time again, but we have so many people that are following these rules and doing what they're supposed to keep people safe. And it's a wonderful thing to see a community come together for a greater purpose. But when you have individuals that are not doing that and are deciding against the rest of the community, that their priority is not with others, but is with themselves, you have situations where there is more spread. And that's why we're doing what we're doing later this evening. I hope this resolution passes. We worked with the county to basically make it so we could issue a fine directly on a public health violation issued by either the state or the county. And that's a pretty significant fine on that resolution. And I understand that, but we're at the point where we really need to be able to empower our officers to enforce this with a pretty significant penalty if we see a party that's happening that's over the limit, and not wearing masks and not distancing, because we all know that we've seen an increase in cases due to social gatherings. I've been on the phone with some of those houses that have even reached out to me and even said, we're sorry, what can we do better? And the same message always applies. Just don't do it. That's the message. It's not, what's the statement that we make? What's the, what can we do going forward? It is just don't have the party. You're going to go to the party. You're going to hang out with the same 10 people anyway. Don't go to the party. Don't host a party with 100 people. Don't host a party with 50 people. Because I'm sorry, you're not going to get everybody to wear a mask in your house. And if you're not willing to hard enforce that limit of the people that are in your yard, you're not responsible to have that party. And that's just the sad truth. And so, we're at the point where we've educated, but now it's time to put something like this in place so we can start really cracking down on some things. So, I appreciate our health officer, Linda Vale. I appreciate the rest of council that has been, really tirelessly working on this, our city staff, everybody that's been doing a lot to try and help. But, we're at the point where we're seeing not some instances of non-compliance that are really just ruining it for everybody else. And I had a really good conversation. The State News put out a great editorial piece talking from the perspective of students that are doing the right thing, that basically say, you know, we want to go back to school. We want to be back to in-person classes. And there's a small minority of people that are ruining it for the rest of us. And it's just sad to see. You know, it's going to hurt our businesses in the long term. It's going to hurt, you know, our people in the long term, and it's going to get people sick. And so I agree with you, Sally. Thanks for calling in. And we're going to keep doing everything we can. I'm glad to see this item on the agenda tonight. Thanks, Sally. Emily, would you mind letting in the next caller?
That's all the callers that we had on the line.
Great. Then our next item is communications from the mayor and council members. Councilmember Watson.
Hi, everybody. So because of some of the comments that were made today, if some of you recall during the attorney interviews, I had wanted to ask about environmentalism and capitalism. And I think a lot about whether or not environmentalism can coexist with capitalism. I like to think about a post-capitalistic society, because making decisions just based on money, when, like someone remarked, like, we're going to have children around that are wondering why we made the decisions we made while we were alive. And there's just more to decisions than just that money piece, that it's going to help us this year or it's going to help us for the next 4 years. The next comment I wanted to make is I just think it would be cool on our city website right now if, when people see the homepage, they could see like something floating around that said, do you need voting information? And they could click on that and get to it. I've talked to some people. It's a little difficult to find the voting information. And I know that there is a Facebook post. Not everybody's a Facebooker, but some people do turn to our site to see information. And if it was possible, I just think it would be cool if it was in a really obvious spot for folks. And my last comment is I hope for an acronym-free day sometimes, because as a new person, there's a lot of acronyms, including the TIF, that people throw around that have been around and they know exactly what that means, but newer people or people listening in, like, it's a little bit harder. And going back to those interviews again, something I liked about the attorney interviews is attorneys are one of those people that are least likely to use acronyms. And I thought that that was cool, so.
I have a couple of attorneys might disagree with you, but yeah.
So thank you. That's what I got today. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Dana. Councilmember Babcock.
And if only I queued up enough acronyms. Pretty much every acronym you've ever heard of came out of government and law. I have two observations, which are going to put me in the snarky category today. But first, there's no delicate way to say this. The good news is people are out walking their dogs, and there are a lot of really great dogs in East Lansing. A lot of people get a lot of exercise walking them. Please pick up after your dogs. You know what happens. Take a bag and please pick up after your dog. I will just leave it at that. I think you know what's going to happen when you take your dog for a walk, and you know other people aren't thrilled with finding the remains of that experience, or even baggies full of the remains of that experience. Don't make me say poop on the air, people, but please pick up your dog's poop. All right, thank you.
Would be the first time that's happened in a city council meeting, I'm sure.
It's nicer than the first thing that came out of my mind when I never.
Councilmember Bacon.
I'm going to move on. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, couple comments. Just to this point around MSU, I was talking with President of ASMSU about this subject, and just any students and people in the community just realize us as a community and MSU as a brand, the inability to follow these simple instructions is very damaging to the brand. To ultimately, people are going to take their MSU experience into the marketplace and attempt to trade it for money. and they're damaging their brand. And that's the purpose why you go to college, to trade your education and your brand for someone to give you money. So at some point, I think it's going to become a reality. It seems way far off to some students, but you might want to realize this very expensive education and this brand is being damaged by the decisions being made by a very few, and you might want to hold them accountable. Secondly, I want to send out just a thank you to the newly seated Police Oversight Study Commission on their efforts on their first night. We made up some ground, set some parameters, and are looking forward to doing the work. And we're going to be meeting twice monthly to accelerate this process and make sure that we can hit certain timelines and parameters that have been set forth. We know the importance of this, and we will put in the work. We'll meet basically every other Monday until completion of this project. And it's that important. So that's where we are with that. And last but not least, to Mrs. Hill's comments, just when the environment comes up, I think it's very personal. I think the impact of bad environment is very disproportionately impacts those people who have very little ways to defend themselves. So around the environment, it's never fully a dollar and cents argument or conversation. You have to protect the least of us when we're dealing with the environment, because it falls right in their backyards. So maybe we don't quite have a sense of that in our community. Not that we're rich, but we have some levels of affluence and influence. So when we're making any environmental decision or consideration, we have to consider the least of us in those outside of just the sheer economics of that. So I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Mayor Pro Tem.
Hey, how's it going? Two things. I wanted to thank Mr. Harmier for his analysis of the Open Meetings Act. I have always kind of wondered why we, I don't know, there's just that the language in that act is a little antiquated. I was telling somebody, I don't remember who, that it would be nice if we can get an updated version that acknowledged any kind of technology beyond fax machines. So I think, what constitutes a meeting, I've always kind of wondered why we defined that as in-person only. And I think his analysis really jived with my feelings on it. I think the alternative that's offered to us of meeting in person and limiting our public comment, because we would be limited on the number of people that could be in that room under the house code orders, is, to me, that is the definitely illegal option, because to me, that's not a public meeting. So I just appreciated him breaking that down for me. The other thing I wanted to talk about, obviously COVID, but I feel like you all know my feelings on that, so I don't need to spend another meeting saying exactly what I've said the last 3 meetings. But I am going to make it kind of a personal crusade to get as many people to the polls as possible on election day. Voting is very important to me. So I'm just going to offer specifically to any MSU groups that might be meeting, if it would be helpful for me to Zoom in to any meeting and just be a please register to vote cheerleader, I would be delighted to do that. We do now have the ability to register on election day, but I sincerely hope that we do not all wait until that day, because that will cause a traffic jam. It's an important election. It's a motivating election, but unfortunately we do still have a tendency to procrastinate. I am the worst among all of us at this. Luckily I'm already registered, so I won't be in that line. But if there's any way that I personally can convince you to register before election day, just call me and I'll give you my whole spiel. And if it would help have a council member come to any meeting, virtual preferred, obviously, and just explain the options, that would be something that I'd be delighted to do. So.
And I had this for my comments, but if Jen Schuster is available, I did want to highlight the clerk's office extending hours as well as adding weekend hours. Jen or George, would you guys mind running through on what are now available from the city?
Yeah, so we've added Saturday hours for 2 Saturdays coming up for the next 2 Saturdays, I believe. Clerk Schuster, did you want to tell the hours of that? I believe is it noon to 4?
Yes, so the next 2 Saturdays, October 17th and 24th, will be open at our City Hall office from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then on Saturday, October 31st and Sunday, November 1st, will be open at both office locations from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m.
So both of those Saturdays were additional adds to give people more flexibility and time to register. So appreciate Clerk Schuster and the staff adding those hours.
And Jen, for the public's sake, so if somebody isn't registered to vote currently in East Lansing, would they be able to say, come to the city clerk's office during one of those times, register and actually obtain and vote, or obtain a ballot and vote at that time?
Absolutely. So you can register to vote at our office, and then you can request an absentee ballot that can be issued to you on the spot. We also have voting booths available there, so you can actually vote your ballot and turn it right back in or take it home with you.
Great, thank you. And thanks to the clerk's office for their work on that. I did have that on my list for acknowledgement, but appreciate the extended hours there. And just a second, what Mayor Pro Tem said, you can register and vote on election day, but we're obviously very much encouraging folks to come out to the clerk's office at any point that they have in the next few weeks. Just to, you can register, you can get your ballot. If you're already registered, you can get your ballot there, vote early and vote now. It's a safer option. Obviously, we're going to be open for that election day, and we're going to be, doing everything we can to maintain people's safety while also making sure that they have their voice. But, just for time's sake and for, safety's sake, vote early. Thank you. All right, so I've got a couple of comments that I want to acknowledge. So first, I want to acknowledge that the city of East Lansing occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabeg, Three Fires Confederacy of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples, lands seceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. My next comment was going to be on the clerk's office, but I did want to just address something that I said earlier. Sorry, I didn't mean to misrepresent. I in no way wanted to suggest that the city of East Lansing and the city council doesn't make decisions that affect businesses. We obviously do, and those have been both in positive and negative ways, and I fully understand that. I apologize if I made that misrepresentation. We do make decisions that really do affect businesses, and we need to be keeping that into account at all times. And obviously, I mentioned this before, but one of the big ways that you talk about is construction and development in our downtown, and attempting to support businesses during that time, and having the negative effect on businesses when it is. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was football is coming up here in a little bit. The city of East Lansing also issued Halloween recommendations. I think those are on the city's website, as well as they went out in a press release and went out to some of the neighborhoods. Really encouraging folks to look through those as they're getting into this time. But, as football season comes up, we do obviously have some concern with the increased activity that tends to bring. Huge economic driver, definitely for our city and for other cities in the Big Ten, but, that does pose, other risks. So I decided last week it might be good for myself to try and get a group of mayors of the Big Ten communities on a call together, get a unified message towards the Big Ten. And so hopefully that's going to be happening this week. Whether it's everybody participating or not, that's all right. But I'm really just sharing ideas, what other folks are doing, what we might be able to provide for them. And then also sending a unified message to the Big Ten on some priority areas that we'd like to see. That's obviously in communication with our health departments directly. They are all meeting, I believe, later this week. The health departments and officials from those individual cities to talk about things that they're going to maybe be requesting from the Big Ten. But it is important. MSU, while we've been working with them very hand in hand, doesn't often have the control over their own personal game schedule that they might like. And so, continuously talking to them about the issues that we're facing might not really get anywhere, just because we're, they don't have that control. But the Big Ten does. So that's where we're going to kind of point our let's say pressure and try to get some movement there. So just wanted to let the community know that that's happening. Those conversations are occurring, and we're really just trying to prepare the best we can for what is to come. But the rules are still in place. I think that today we're passing something that's going to be in effect. Obviously, during that football season, that'll be good, but we're continuing to monitor and trying to respond in the best way we can to this crisis. And I just want to thank our city staff for being willing to work with us on this, and just all their continued efforts to help keep people in our community safe. So our next item on the agenda is the city manager's report. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just also wanted to chime in on the environmental issue because, it's obviously a very important issue. It's been a strategic priority for many years for the city. If you think back, I definitely think that there's a consideration of a cost-benefit analysis, but it really does weigh heavy in terms of the environment. Think back 60, 70 years ago, cities would have sewer mains that would go straight into rivers and dump untreated sewage at some point into rivers. And then we added wastewater plants. We spend as a city a lot of resources, a lot of money to treat wastewater. What are we doing? We're cleaning the water, recycling the water, reclaiming it, putting it back into the river clean. We're taking all the solids, landfilling or even land applying them. So that is a tremendous resource that we're using, but we're recapturing clean water. Much cheaper just to dump polluted water into the river. We wouldn't think of doing that at this point, but it's costly. So all the things we do to preserve the environment, the air, the water, the land, we're doing that because if you look at cities around the world that don't have good environmental regulations and you see air quality issues, and they talk about people having health issues because of air and water quality, certainly you can say that the cost of not preserving your environment is tremendous in terms of the health and the well-being of your community. So I think we certainly have to make cost-benefit decisions with environmental considerations, but I think there is nothing wrong with erring on the side of protecting the environment, even at a cost. So if you spend more to have less emissions in a vehicle, then there's a cost-benefit analysis of that. You have to look at it and just say, well, is this a reasonable cost? But to spend a little bit more for a car that has less emissions, I think is certainly a reasonable decision. We have lots of things like that we do to preserve the environment. Recycling is not always a money maker. In fact, there's a cost a lot of times for recycling, but we're not landfilling many cubic tons of materials every year going into a landfill that goes back into the supply stream. So those are decisions we make, policy decisions council makes on a regular basis. And I think they certainly are reasonable to protect the environment and sustain our community for many years to come. So our children and generations beyond have a safe and healthy community to live in. That was all on that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. City Attorney's report.
I am still happy to be here.
Good to know.
That's all I have.
Thank you. And I just want to appreciate Foster Swift's very swift response, no pun intended, on maybe a little bit of pun intended, on everything happening really on the state level right now. There's a lot of confusion, and I think city staff, myself, and probably George have been on the phone several times with our attorneys trying to make sure that we can do the things we want to do to keep our citizens safe. So thank you for that.
Sure.
All right, our next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Mr. Lahanas?
Yep, we have the following items on the consent agenda for council's consideration. Item 3.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. A, Jeremy Frazee to the University Student Commission for a full term ending on September 30th, 2021. B, Georgia Frost to the University Student Commission for a full term ending on September 30th, 2021. C, Matt Apostle to the University Student Commission for a full term ending September 30th, 2021. D, Jonathan Sheehan to the University Student Commission for a full term ending on September 30th, 2021. Item 3.2, approve a conflict waiver for Foster Swift to represent the city in the sale of the real estate to MSUFCU. Those are all the items on the consent agenda.
Great. Our next, sorry, I was about to move on for no reason. Are there any items that we want to be taken off the consent agenda at this time? Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Can we take off the MSUFCU conflict just so we can have a discussion that the public can participate in or hear?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
We will take that off and add that as item 4.4, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Thanks. So any other changes at this point? I have 2 items on there, so. Great. Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
Motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor of the consent agenda as amended, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Wonderful. That passes unanimously. Our next item up in the agenda is the business agenda. Item 4.1, discussion of DDA Evergreen properties and surrounding area. And I'll just request that any presentations that are made today are please made available on the city's website after the presentation is concurred. Tom?
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council, and good evening. Nicole, if you'd pull up the presentation, please. Tonight, I have some background information for the council and the public about what's been collectively known as the Park District Planning Area. I have a lot of slides, but I'll move through them very quickly, and we can always go back if you have specific questions. So go ahead, next slide. I'll give you an orientation, a bit of the history over the last 19 or so years, including the DDA acquisition and past development proposals, and then some policy questions for the council to begin to think about as we move into the future. Next slide. So the DDA owns a bit over an acre here, just north of Grand River and west of Abbott. Next slide. Here's an aerial of the current ownership. Red is private, yellow is the city, the parking lots, and the green is the DDA's Evergreen properties. Next slide. So our story begins really in 2001 when the DDA acquired an old bank building along Abbott, 303 Abbott, to catalyze redevelopment. Next. Several projects proposals were made over the next period of years, starting with Museum Place in 2001. Next slide. By 2004, the developer had acquired the bank building, which was vacated in August. Next slide. By December 2007, the developer had formally submitted an application for a redevelopment. Next slide. The redevelopment would have included the Michigan Museum office, apartments, for sale townhomes, and 600 to 700 parking spaces. Next slide. Many public meetings occurred in 2008, and in February of that year, there was a bit of a pivot, a move to more of a performing arts use as the anchor. Next slide. Around May of 2008, the DDA began entering options to acquire the properties known as the Evergreen properties on Eastern Evergreen, and here they are. Next slide, please. In June, that developer purchased the properties at 120 to 134 West Grand River, as well as the property at 341 to 345 Evergreen, known as the Evergreen Arms building to the north there. Next slide. By July of 2008, the Planning Commission had recommended approval of the project, and the development agreement was entered between the city DDA and BRA. Next slide. After that, the DDA began exercising its options on all of the Evergreen properties, eventually closing in August of 2009. Next slide. Just showing you kind of the ownership at the time, and you can move on to the next slide. Unfortunately, due to many factors, including the Great Recession, by June of 2012, the development ultimately was terminated. So next slide. An RFP was developed and issued after many meetings and a lot of stakeholder input. Next slide. In November of 2004, the voters ultimately did not approve the land sale at Lot 4 for a project from DTN, and ultimately that project did not move forward. Next slide. DRW Convexity acquired several properties and subsequently came forward with plans in 2017. And next slide. After an initial project concept did not move forward, they returned in 2008 with this proposal, which ultimately moved forward and did not include the evergreen properties. And you can see this is, go ahead, next slide. This is the Abbott, which is now complete in terms of occupancy. The build outs are occurring for the ground floor retail and with the Graduate Hotel also underway. So move back to the next slide, please. Also on the old Evergreen Arms site, Convexity has approval for this building, which includes low to moderate income housing to satisfy the city's ordinance requirement for 25% housing diversity. Next slide, please. So at that point, the DDA was once again gearing up for an offering to the public in the form of an RFQP, a request for qualification and proposal. Go ahead, next slide. Sorry, that one didn't have any pretty pictures. And while that RFP was being developed, a local developer entered into negotiations with the DDA with plans that eventually were formulated as this concept, which is Park Place West on the Evergreen properties. Next slide, please. By May of 2019, the plans were modified and included market and low to moderate income apartments, active ground floor market and pavilion concepts, and parking. Next slide. Ultimately, this project was not approved by the council. So you can move to the next slide, please. In March of 2020, meanwhile, the voters authorized the sale of parking lot number 4 at the corner of Albert and Abbott to Michigan State Federal Credit Union for their development of a commercial office building. And as you know, this was approved by council and just a few weeks ago on September 22nd. Next slide, please. So the DDA remains the owner of these properties. Next slide, you can see they are still servicing a significant amount of debt on the properties. This debt was restructured in 2019 to reduce the principal payments, which will cost some additional interest, but that's one benefit of our current situation on the global scale is that our interest payments have gone down. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, the debt is serviced by the DDA, but it's backed by the full faith and credit of the city ultimately. So just a bit of info on the properties themselves. They're currently zoned RM32. Next slide. The future land use designation is M3 mixed use. And go ahead, next slide. I would note that the previous development proposals that have been approved have all been rezoned to conditional B3, which is analogous to M4. It's a bit more dense than the M3 that is in the comp plan's future land use designation. Next slide. The properties are no longer in the historic district. Next slide. So again, the DDA once again prepared and released the RFP based on input from the stakeholders that they had put together. And you can go to the next slide, where they really came up with this concept of microurbanism, or which used the concept that was coined to really describe the desires of the broad group of stakeholders, which ultimately is really about attracting folks from all walks of life for food, work, and culture. So next slide, please. In February, the DDA received 2 responses to the RFP, ultimately moving forward with the Citadel concept from River Caddis Development. The concept currently includes a large amount of tenant-driven commercial space, active ground floor uses, and a transformation of the properties. Next slide, please. Currently, you can go ahead to the next slide. It's just a rendering of the. So currently the DDA has a memorandum of understanding with River Caddis, essentially allowing them an exclusive for a period of time to review the properties and come in with a bona fide proposal. At this point, the project does hinge on really a confirmed anchor tenant for a significant amount of office space. And that has been really hard hit in this period of COVID pandemic, especially in this period. And it's made it very difficult, I think, to break through that barrier, although productive conversations do continue. A project team of stakeholders has been engaged, and we're currently getting info to our new attorneys, trying to get them up to speed for both the council, city attorneys, as well as some special attorneys that are hired by the DDA, really to specialize in areas and provide sort of a peer review on some aspects of these development agreements and other associated real estate agreements. So they're engaged, and ultimately we're working towards negotiating a purchase and sale agreement, really as a pre-development agreement as we move forward. I think it's likely that staff will be recommending an extension to the MOU with River Caddis to the DDA. And that's really, go ahead, next slide. It really brings us to some of the key questions for the council to begin to consider. Broadly, they can be identified as tenancy, financing, infrastructure, and parking. Those are really the big umbrellas. Go ahead to the next slide. There are a lot of concepts currently being explored, and we have some policy questions for your consideration. They don't really need to be resolved tonight, but we thought it'd be good to float them and start the conversation with council. So in terms of tenancy, really it's the question of, does the council confirm that additional office users in downtown is in line with our current strategic objectives for diversification? And will the council support the relocation and expansion of a high-wage innovative office user through the use of potential use of local and state economic tools, which could include some of the following and others. Next slide, please. In terms of financing, does the council have an appetite for using tax increment financing to support elements of a project to make it financially viable? And would innovative office tenancy and activated ground floor uses be considered as significant public benefit, specifically in terms of the council's policy on TIF? Next. So in terms of infrastructure, I think next week a plan will be in front of the council potentially, but really it's a culmination of staff's analysis over many years about the best situation for infrastructure for the future to both serve the neighborhood to the north, update what's currently underground and on the surface, and really prepare for the future, both in terms of the built environment, but also future development opportunities. Next slide, please. So you can see this is what's being designed currently in terms of servicing the neighborhood to the north and expanding that connection. And also, go ahead to the next slide. You can see that there's some amount of flexibility in terms of what might be possible to think about the future of this area as it relates to future development on the evergreen properties and in the surrounding area. And this is really where we would allow some flexibility and coordination in terms of in terms of any future development proposal. Go ahead, next slide. So in terms of the infrastructure, really one of the key policy questions is in terms of the funding, whether we use the city funding sources from water, sewer, and streets, and or seek future brownfield funding through tax increment financing to either pay for or reimburse the city for some of those costs. Next slide. And then in terms of parking, does the council really have the perspective that that more publicly accessible parking is necessary west of Abbott, and therefore is the council willing to consider structured parking west of Evergreen if the city's exposure to financial risk can be minimized or eliminated? Next slide. That is the end of my presentation, but I'd be happy to take your questions. And I know we have some other staff on the line who are also available for you.
Sorry, I was muted. I think I thank you for that presentation. And I think it'd be good if we kind of went through some of those policy discussions as a council right now. If the rest of council is all right with that. I think it's important to give staff guidance going forward. Would you mind pulling up on the screen the first policy question slide? I'm gonna try and get to everybody. See everybody on my screen, but.
Just again, Mayor, I mean, our plan really wasn't to put you on the spot for all of these, but I
mean, if
certainly
give me a little bit back. So, I mean, do you want us to have a full discussion on this? Are these things that we should be thinking about going forward that we will have a further discussion, or do you want us to talk about these a little bit openly right now? I'm really. We want
to jump in and say I think that they're raising the questions that council would need to consider as we move forward. And again, the idea isn't to put you on the spot without notice, but just to say, these are the things because I've talked about a heavy lift to get a project like this done. So these are the types of things that we'll have to be envisioning to get a project done. And then of course, we can come back in the coming weeks and have a further discussion after council has a time to digest it and think about it more. And then bring back also a presentation perhaps from the developer at some point and talk more about what project they're envisioning.
Okay.
So that sort of a future direction, and then maybe at that point, several weeks from now, have a further discussion about council's preference after you sort of get to see the future. Does that sound reasonable, Mr. Fehrenbach?
It does, and I think specifically tonight, I mean, if there's any other big policy or issues or otherwise that you want staff to be cognizant of or investigating, I think it'd be great to hear that tonight as well.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things definitely overall, but I'll let Mayor Pro Tem go first, and then I can touch on a couple of things that I wrote down.
Two things. Thanks, Aaron. This city has just such a broken relationship with parking. So at every opportunity, I just want to give my personal opinion that surface parking is environmentally detrimental, and that if we can stack up our cars, we should, that it has a hugely beneficial effect just in terms of space, but also in terms of our stormwater management. So just putting that out there. But that being said, we do already have a lot of parking garages. So for me to analyze that part of this question, it would be really helpful for me to see not our current usage rates, because I do understand that we're not building for our current situation, but we really are building for the future. So if you could just kind of at a future meeting, because I know this is going to take some research, but if you could just paint a picture to me of all of our current space in terms of housing, in terms of office, and then when the new users come online, I'm specifically concerned about the valet parking with the hotel. I know that that's been a point of stress with some of the other downtown merchants, just because the nearest parking garage to the hotel is also the nearest parking garage to the densest part of our retail center. And so there's a concern that the valet parking is going to take up that whole parking garage. But if you could just kind of project about 5 years into the future, when theoretically all of these users are online, and let's just pretend that they're fully occupied, because that is why we're building them, right? Not we, the developers, but that is why we are engaged in these projects. And just kind of do we still need another parking garage at that point, I guess is the question. I people have a general reluctance to cross major roads when they are offered the opportunity to avoid it. And so there is definitely going to be a perception that if we have several major office users plus the hotel on the west side of Abbott, there's going to be a perception that there's no parking, regardless of whether there's 10,000 parking spaces 2 blocks away. So,
Right.
you know, there will be a perception that we need parking, but is there a reality that we need parking? I guess that's my question. So if you could help me paint that picture of, 5 years in the future, everybody's full up, do we still need parking? That would be helpful. And then to Councilmember Watson's comment about the TLAs, the 3-letter acronyms, if we could maybe have a TIF for dummies conversation or a brownfield for dummies conversation, and really just, I'm not saying that you're a dummy, I'm sorry, Dana, I didn't mean that, but newbies, including myself, honestly, because even though I'm a little bit more used to some of these words, I mean, these concepts are just bafflingly broad. So if you could just break down what tax increment financing is, what's the increment, what's being taxed, et cetera, that would be really helpful. I do see value in using the tools that we have available to move things in the way that we feel that they should be moved for the benefit of our community. But I'm also cognizant that we can't overuse those tools. And so there would have to be obviously demonstrated public benefit to any of those decisions. My personal feeling is that if we do have to use tax increment financing, I personally feel a high level of responsibility to the other taxing jurisdictions that are part of that discussion, since they don't have a vote. And so to me, it would have to be a public benefit that was sufficient to be regionally boosting, not just East Lansing boosting, because it's not all our money. So those are my immediate comments. Yeah, anyway, mostly about parking. Sorry, everybody loves parking.
Any other council members want to go before I go? Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. I'll just throw this out there. Went to unmute myself and stop the video. All right. I can't help but reflexively wonder about the future of office use. I do these short-term projects, and what I'm doing is for entities that really, really prize their security, and they are now resigned to letting all of us work at home around the country instead of in regional office centers. And no one I know is going back into an office until at least next year. The last I heard from one group I work for is at the earliest March of next year. Places are letting leases go. These are big office space users where they bring us in sort of in what they call the hotel model. You come in, you work at the computer with a thin client, and you go. One of my concerns is that we operate in a different world than the developers, and even if they're local, they are playing on a different development game than we are. There are tax breaks for properties that don't return, there are tax offsets for them for having properties that may be vacant or not earning. We have a different experience when we have vacant properties. It makes our downtown look bad. It makes it hard for us to continue to grow economically. They're painting sort of a rosy picture of the future of office space, and no one I know is going back to the office. And I think we really need to do a gut check there and evaluate carefully what the city of East Lansing's interests are, rather than just what we're being promised. As far as TIF, I have very mixed feelings about TIF. It can be beneficial. I am not opposed to all TIFs. However, as Councilmember Gregg said, I have a concern for the other entities that should be capturing taxes being cut out. And I also cannot stomach a TIF that is not for public benefit. There are a few, only a few, but 300 West Grand comes to mind where a TIF was offered that benefited only the occupants of that building. And that is going to be insufficient for me. I mean, I'm on record now that unless there's a real public benefit, I will not support a TIF. So just putting that out there. Thank you.
Good. Other council members? Go ahead, Dan.
So I was wondering if you could go back to the slide where you mentioned D3. It was the slide before the historic district slide. I wanted to look at that again. And can you tell me more about the low to moderate income housing?
Sure. Let me get to the slide. So essentially, the Planning Commission, when they went through the comprehensive plan process, decided that the most appropriate future land use designation for the properties would be M3, which is kind of analogous to our current B2, which is not the highest density of B3. And that was a point of contention with the DDA, who kind of did not agree with that and requested that it be thought of as B3, but ultimately the Planning Commission moved forward with M3 as the designation. B2, which is currently analogous to, allows for up to 6 stories or 84 feet with a special use permit within the DDA. And again, the previous approved projects have all been conditional B3 to a specific project. And that would allow 8 stories or 112 feet with a special use permit, but could be increased to 140 feet with 3/4 vote of the council. And in terms of the low to moderate income building, that is approved for convexity on what we think of as Parcel C, or the Evergreen Arms, former Evergreen Arms property. And there are, I believe, 74 units of low to moderate income qualified tenancy that'll be part of that building. I believe there's also 25 units approved for market rate that would be dispersed throughout the project. And that is required by the developer as phase 2 of the project to satisfy their ordinance requirement for 25% diversified housing use.
So I'm a visual learner, and I don't know if the slide came up.
Yeah.
Okay, if it came up or not, but I just want to take a look at it again so I can read it also.
Sure. So I believe it's slide number 32 that you're referencing. So if you want to pull that up, Nicole, page 32.
Okay.
This one, right? Oh, it was there. There it is. Back.
And then again, I just request that this is made available on our website as well.
Thank you.
Oh, certainly.
Thanks.
Nita, did you have anything else before I? Okay, great. Councilmember Bacon, did you want to comment on this in general, or?
Yeah, this is my second presentation, seeing this process and just kind of seeing the timeline on the debt. Just my first impression and now second impression is it creates a kind of a weak hand with that outstanding bolus of dollars that are sitting out there on the time horizon. I can't I must make it very difficult to deal with developers because they're nuanced and they're not dumb, knowing the amount of pressure that debt load is creating. So I don't know if this is a statement or a question, but that has to create additional pressure, correct, on decision making and that kind of thing. Or what's the approach to the debt long term if the deal can't be reached or if we can't find a suitable solution?
So I think the DDA obviously has been discussing this for many years. I think I can synthesize their perspective in terms of a real desire to responsibly manage the debt as part of a redevelopment. That is really the goal. The DDA likely could continue to service the debt for the remainder of the term without becoming insolvent. However, it would basically make it impossible for them to do a lot of the good things that they do to move the downtown forward. So it is certainly not a desired outcome. And the desired outcome, I think, since 2009 has really been to find a project that is desired by the community, but also allows the DDA and the city to responsibly manage this significant amount of debt.
Makes sense. I would say the urgency is not on so much striking a deal, but I think the closer as you approach that debt load and that timeline, I think it weakens your hand. So I would say, obviously, we want something suitable for the community and that kind of thing, but you're kind of got a 2-lane highway running against you here. It's tricky. So there's just an observation.
So I am going to put the council on a little bit of a spot at some point during my comments, but I'm going to comment on everybody's favorite topic, parking, first. So, I mean, just to echo some of the statements that Mayor Pro Tem Greg said, and this is really, it's partially my comments are coming out of, the parking task force that we had convened a little while ago and some of the data that I saw earlier. But just, I think that, when we're talking about occupancy rates, I do think with the increased amount of office users, the increased amount of people that are actually living in the downtown, permit rates become, something that is kind of at the forefront of that conversation. And so, if we do have lower tenancy in, some of the parking garages that might be a little bit farther down Grand River, I would say that offering that as, their incentive to say, if you are going to build office down here, especially, when we're even talking about MSUFCU's building, if they're going to be having office downtown and they're going to want permitted users in our downtown, let's maybe move that not towards our centralized parking structures, but maybe some of the more underutilized ones that are on maybe the more east side of our downtown. I don't know what that looks like in terms of numbers, but it's something that I've obviously talked about a good amount at our parking task force and other things in terms of the difference in downtown when permits were enacted before and now, in terms of the amount of people that are living here and the amount of people that hopefully, knock on wood, will be working here. And so, when we do have this conversation about whether or not we need parking on the west side of Abbott, I am always cognizant of the fact that, we do have a lot of parking in the city of East Lansing. It is underutilized. And there can be multiple reasons why it is underutilized, right? It's not just people that are, coming in and shopping. It's also people that, are living and working there. And if we can make that tenable for folks, maybe even if they have to walk a couple of blocks to get to work, might not be the worst thing in the world because they might have to walk by a couple of local businesses too on their way in and grab a coffee or lunch or, maybe a gift for family coming home. So I always plug that just because I do think that conversation is important, and depending on the amount of workers and Mayor Pro Tem's Greg's point, having the numbers to find out there what we really, really need in terms of utilization, obviously, I think is an important conversation to have. But I just want to put that plug in there that if we can be unique and think outside the box in terms of our permitting rates and where we're actually putting those permits. I mean, I'm not suggesting this is an option, but even if one of our bigger lots is dedicated, completely to those permit users on the more east side of downtown, maybe that is something that we can do to start moving some of that activity a little bit farther. So that's just my little short thing on parking. Again, I just, I think we need all that information and that available before, especially if there's going to be public money involved in something like that. It's just, it gets a little bit in the weeds, and I want to make sure that we're making the right decision for the taxpayers. I'm going to put the council a little bit on the spot here. We have one developer that, you know, is going to be looking for an extension of an MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding. In the past, we've had city councils where maybe the city council and the DDA aren't necessarily on the same page. DDA goes forward and does something, and you know, the city, it then may come back to the city council, and the city council is not so on board with the decision that was made. So I just, before the DDA has to make that decision on extending the Memorandum of Understanding, I would like to hear from council members your let's say compatibility, or like, what's the right word I'm looking for? Your openness to that conversation happening. We're not talking about voting on a project here. We're not talking about a specific tenant. We're not talking about, you know, the tax increment financing on it, but we do have one developer that's proposed a type of use at a, you know, general height, and you know, that probably will be bringing some type of tax increment financing into the mix. We've gone through an RFP process that you know, Mr. Fehrenbach talk through, but I do want to assess, at least from a council angle, so I can bring that information back to the DDA and maybe even Mayor Pro Tem if I'm not available at those DDA meetings, that the council is open to this conversation continuing to happen. And if that developer, from what you have heard, or that project from what you have heard and read so far given to you by staff, is not something you're interested in, then I want to be able to voice that to the DDA so they know that this isn't something that we want to, you know, or at least we're considering going forward. You know what I mean? So I might start on my left. Go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
Are you just asking for discussion, or is this for a motion just to allow them to continue?
No, this wouldn't be for a motion. This is just general discussion. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Mayor Pro Tem, I might start with you because you're probably most familiar with the situation.
Yeah, I think past RFPs and past projects have shown that this is kind of a complicated parcel. I don't think that there's like enthusiastic competition over finding projects to go in that space. So I think we've got a developer that seems capable of delivering what they've proposed. They seem to be actively working to secure an attractive tenant, which is, I think Mr. Fehrenbach touched on his presentation, that securing a tenant, a long-term tenant for that would be a pretty crucial element of making sure that that works. And it seems like our current person is willing to put in that work. And so I would like to offer them the opportunity to see their project through, if it is possible to see it through to completion. I don't see a huge benefit in starting over right now. And I actually think that there is a problem in trying to micromanage things on that level, that we can kind of derail projects unintentionally or make things too complicated so that nobody can actually meet our expectations. So, you know, a big office building is not the most glamorous thing that ever happened, but I think it's a solid proposal for that parcel, and I'm fine with the extension.
Great, thank you. And again, this isn't a motion. This is just, I think it's just good feedback to give to the DDA when they're having this conversation, because I think that they want to be in step with what the council priorities are. So, go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
Yeah, I think in support of kind of what Councilperson Babcock was saying, that the climate and the kind of future of office space, I think that is in question long term. I'm usually one to allow the market to control that, but this, when you're putting in permanence and permanent space like this, it could be a disastrous decision. I'd probably like to hear a little bit more long term about the feasibility and long term viability of office space, and just making sure we're not getting into a dead entity. Because I really could see where a lot of people don't return to office space work in a lot of ways, and maybe the workplace is never quite the same again. So it's a curious moment, you know, to be building out into the future. It's never, with taxpayer money or any other money, we don't want to gamble without having all the information. So that'd be my one concern.
Mr. Fehrenbach, do you foresee a situation where maybe we could even have the developer maybe even come to a discussion only meeting of the council. I mean, I know we had a joint meeting, you know, the DDA and the city council before, which I thought was really, really beneficial at one point. And just, you know, I think that Councilmember Bacon's, you know, questions are valid. And, you know, I do want both entities to be on the same page. So, you know, what would you maybe even suggest going forward to try and make sure that is the case? Kind of putting you on the spot now too.
Sure. No, I think that's reasonable. I also think that you know, there is cause for concern. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns in terms of what the future holds. There is some research that suggests that, you know, a likely outcome could be kind of a return to office in a kind of a hybrid manner where folks, you know, will be in the office or in an office environment for certain periods of time, and then also be able to work remotely. I think you know, from you know, anecdotal and personal encounters, I think, you know, having a work environment is beneficial in a lot of ways in terms of productivity and such. But we don't know what's in store for the next foreseeable time without a vaccination for this pandemic. There's, you know, a lot of unknowns, and you know, we've had a lot of frank conversations with the developer. But I think one signal is that although we have not, the developer has not been able to get a commitment from a tenant, the conversations haven't ceased. There's still significant interest, at least reported by the developer, and there are still certainly people in the market for office space, including, you know, MSUFCU, who is making a significant investment in our downtown. So I think that it's likely that a future that includes office does exist. Is it likely to maybe change the way people use it or the way fundamentally offices have been designed? I think that's probably likely. But you know, we'll obviously continue to be researching that, and I know the developer will as well. Again, I think the critical component of an office development of this size for these properties is really getting a confirmation that we do have a long-term user committed, and that's I think that's something we share with the developer.
Do you think then that is a conversation that, you know, I mean, you know, hopefully if they do secure a long-term tenant, that's a conversation that might be able to be brought back to council? You know, maybe even included with the developer. So those kind of questions can be answered in terms of the raw numbers of things, like what that tenant will mean for the future of the development and how it's going to empower them to find others.
Certainly bring them back to the council. And I think the reason that project team was put together that includes a broad array of stakeholders was really to sort of vet any of these types of issues prior to really even bringing it to the council. But I know the developer is happy to come and talk to the council.
So Ron, in general, and again, I'm putting you on the spot here, so I apologize, but you know, with those concerns, you know, the MOU is coming up on the DDAs, and is that something you're interested in seeing pass through on their end, just so they can work this out, or are the concerns, you know, that you have enough that
no, the concerns to learn more, extend the runway is fine. They need as much runway as they need to operate. But no, that was just a secondary. After Councilperson Babcock's statement, it really stuck out to me because that's been a long-term concern of mine, that space utilization coming out of COVID is going to be very different.
Right.
So that's just been in the back of my mind. So she pointed it out. So I just wanted to support her statement.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and again, I think you know, kind of Mayor Pro Tem put it in the right terms, but really what they're looking at is extending or kind of starting over, right, in terms of finding somebody new or issuing another RFP. I mean, there's some different options there, but I want to make sure that I can get the right perspective of council.
Yeah, they have my support with room to operate.
Okay.
Move forward.
Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. How long of an extension do you think they're considering?
Mr. Fehrenbach.
I would think 90 days probably.
Okay. I mean, on the one hand, we don't have anybody beating down the door for this. Unfortunately, you know, I've likened this project to buying a used car. You know, sometimes you buy a used car, you get a great deal, it works out really well. And sometimes you just have to cut your losses and go. But used cars, I've had both experiences. One lasted for 12 years, one lasted for 3 months. It seemed like a great idea at the time, and people were doing their best. This has just been a misbegotten project in many ways, and no one's particularly to blame. I can go along with 90 days. I don't want to find us in a position where we were last year, where one day I'm old school, I say open the paper, but let's be honest, click on, the link. We all know, East Lansing info. All right, so we all click on it and like 12 movie theaters, and the next month we click on it and like an ice rink. I don't want to get in that loop where things that just preposterous continually be thrown out there with no reality attached and no timeline. I wish I knew what the answer for this was. I don't. But yeah, 90 days, great. But beyond that, we're maybe it's time to call in some professionals, just convene a much larger conversation about what could be built there. It is a weird space, what the community wants. Another 90 days is fine, but on day 91, let's revisit our options. Thank you.
Thank you for that guidance. Councilmember Watson, do you have any particular thoughts on this item?
I was thinking, I had the same question about how long we were talking about, and the 90 days sounds fine. And like some other people were talking about, I would feel comfortable hearing about research they've done and their confidence that whatever the concept is, that it's gonna be successful. And just some history with, I don't know, the last time they built a big building, and again, just hearing more about their history so that I can feel comfortable and also see if we're not headed down the same bad tracks that we've been down before.
Sure, I think that's reasonable. Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to say that I am absolutely cognizant of the changing work environment. I think notable to this discussion, there was a major customer service center that was set to move into Meridian Township, which just backed out because they're letting all of their phone service people work from home indefinitely. So that is, absolutely a critical component to this. But I also, all the Babcock's industry is moving entirely virtual, but not every one of my acquaintances is able to work from home. So I think that we are going to have something. There will be a purpose for office, especially, I don't have any idea what type of tenant this developer is lining up, but I'm thinking of things like laboratories where you physically have to be in the same area as your equipment, right? Anyway, I just didn't want to belittle the fact that we are in a major shift change in relationship to work and office space.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I appreciate that, and I think that's definitely a discussion going forward. Councilmember Babcock, do you have anything before we move on?
Yeah, on a lighter note, if my much better half doesn't move back to his office, I will be looking for office space.
That's
Some
fair.
things are incompatible, and living two sets of dictation. Yeah.
Home life never put in the equation.
Can I have an office, please?
Yeah, we'll see if we can get the developer to put that in there, right? Anyway, so thank you for you guys. I appreciate you guys letting me put you on the spot a little bit here, but I do think it's important. And I think that, kind of DDA, City Council being on the same page, at least on the decisions that they're going to have to make soon is good for feedback purposes. Mr. Fehrenbach, I didn't mean to interrupt you or derail. Did you have anything else that you wanted to touch on this? Okay, great. Then I will move us on to 4.2, consideration of policy resolution 2027. a resolution adopting Emergency Ordinance 1496, an ordinance requiring compliance with public health orders. I have this down as a city manager, and I imagine we're both going to be talking about this a little bit.
Yeah, so we have Mr. Homier available, who came up with the approach. We've had a lot of discussion about the need for our police department to have a mechanism to enforce against parties and have more of a cause and effect. So obviously right now we're taking enforcement for things that are sort of ancillary to COVID. We're taking enforcement for loud sort of nuisance parties, for noise, for party litter, but obviously wanting to be able to take direct action for things that violate the public health orders has been an area of discussion for weeks. Mr. Homier obviously came up with the approach, and obviously we have Chief Kim Johnson on as well in case it's a discussion about actual enforcement. So with that, City Attorney Homier, did you want to walk through your approach in the ordinance?
Sure, it's fairly straightforward. I think the grounds for the emergency ordinance are actually lengthier than the ordinance provisions themselves. And really what it simply provides is for a civil infraction for violating either state health orders or local health orders, Ingham County health orders. And I will say I did have some discussion with the City of Lansing attorney as well. They are adopting a similar approach, except they went, I think, one step further and also made it a misdemeanor, which, the city manager and I talked about and didn't think that that was prudent at this time to do that, which is why we left it a civil infraction punishable by a $500 fine.
Great.
So one thing I'll notice, Mayor, if I could mention as well, that obviously we felt it was an emergency order, which means under normal circumstances, it has to be introduced and then passed at a separate meeting. But because of obviously COVID spreading in the community and the urgency of need for enforcement and using all tools available, also with game days coming up, we thought it was important to have this tool available in case there were large incidents or large parties. Also that we would be able to publicize this tomorrow, posting it on Thursday in the LSJ, thereby being able to take enforcement after publication, if I'm correct about that, and we would be able to begin enforcement immediately thereafter. So by the weekend, we should be able to hopefully be able to take enforcement as well.
1 second, Councilmember Babcock. I'd like to, Kim Johnson, our new police chief, is on the line. If you have any thoughts on this, please feel free to chime in.
Good evening. No additional thoughts. We're prepared to begin enforcement this weekend. Also, we've made contact with the courts, and they're getting their stuff squared away. Also, with processing our ticket and things like that. So, other than that, we will be ready to move forward.
Okay, great. Councilmember questions, comments. I know Councilmember Babcock, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Actually, I think Chief Johnson, and welcome, sir. I think Chief Johnson answered my question, which is how are we going to enforce it? It sounds like we'll have officers writing the tickets.
Yes, we will. It's a civil infraction violation. We'll be out there writing tickets. Right now they've had plenty of time for warnings, and this it's an emergency situation. We plan on enforcing this ordinance, and we're not really too keen about doing many warnings initially. We could just go ahead and enforce the violation as we see fit.
I will say I completely agree. I was out to dinner downtown Saturday night, and a much better half and I reminded several people to put on masks. We got everything from, oh yeah, sorry, to a lot of those. And as the night went on, it was roaming Chads. Bunches of roaming Chads downtown, and we've been patient, we've educated, and as one of our callers said tonight, she's been asking people to wear masks for what, 6-7 months. I think this is something that is unfortunate but necessary and highly overdue. We've given a lot of breaks and a lot of leeway, and as I like to say, law is made for the lowest common denominator. And so common denominator, you've done your job. Now we're going to have laws and we're going to have fines. And so be it.
Yeah, and just a point of clarification, Mr. Homier and Mr. Lahanas, this isn't going to be applied to our downtown mask order, correct? This is just for Ingham County public health orders directly?
Public health orders, is my understanding, not the mask order, which was a $25 civil infraction if it's enforced.
Right. Okay. Yeah, this is, again, actually, you know what, George, would you mind running through a couple of those? Now we have, you know, some more public health orders that were made in light of the Supreme Court decision, but would you mind running through some situations in which this could be enforced in a house?
So I think that the primary one really is if people exceed 25 people in the exterior or 10 people interior to a house. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to enforce 10 people interior to a house because they can't be from the same household, but you have to be able to observe something or observe that to be able to write that infraction. The most clear one that I can see is, and where we've had problems, is people collecting in front yards and drinking and socializing in yards. And that would be the primary area here, is trying to limit people's gatherings. So if they go over 25, take enforcement. We have been in discussion with public health about potentially lowering that number beyond 25 or lower than 25. I spoke with the city manager of State College yesterday, and they are actually at 10 in State College, PA, 10 as outside. And they are still experiencing a very big uptick in COVID in State College, PA, actually worse than East Lansing. So they have taken pretty drastic steps. And I actually talked with our public health official about that, potentially reducing that number further, because at this point we do see people sort of testing to the limit.
Right.
They're coming in with 15, 18, or 20 people in front yards, and they're all around the drinking table. So perhaps we might need to lower that number further. But really, it's the outdoor parties, it's the front porches, it's taking enforcement with those types of situations. But of course, continuing the noise violations, because when you have noise in the neighborhood, it attracts people to the party, and we want to make sure that that's not happening.
Right, and that's untenable, especially for some of the residents that live within those neighborhoods and have to deal with it. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I also think, this is important going forward, just because we're all moving into football season, of course. We're also moving into just a little bit colder weather too, and that might drive people more indoors. And, again, see a lot of people being very, very responsible, but we still have those problem areas. And so I think this is good to have in place, because, we're going to be enforcing this. And then city manager, myself, Mayor Pro Tem, and a representative from the police department have been in conversations with MSU for several months now. And of course, we're going to be sending these violations directly to the university as well, correct? If it involves an MSU student?
That's correct, as we've been doing on all the violations of a similar nature, and they've been putting them through their judiciary process.
Wonderful. Councilmember Babcock?
Okay, this is really embarrassing, but what are we going to do? I thought I had hoped that this would cover that, but what are we going to do about mask violations? Can we do anything at this point?
That's a conversation we can have. Mr. Lahanas, I know we talked about this weekend when we were both out, so please feel free.
What I've observed is that during the daytime and into the early evening, the mask utilization is actually pretty darn good. I mean, people are getting the message. When you get into the later evening, past 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, when it's more people who are young people who are going out to go to parties, doing the partying type thing, the mask utilization seems to go down pretty low. So the mayor mentioned we were out on Friday night late, and still struggling with that uptick, that people are not really getting the message or don't want to get the message on the masks. I am still of the opinion from council that we've heard loud and clear that we want to try not to have police officers involved in enforcing minor issues with residents. So I think that our approach still is the right approach about not having officers enforcing masks. My plan is to, in addition to the ambassadors, when we have our neighborhood resource specialists up and running, to have those positions, which will be uniformed people, but not armed, in the downtown, reminding people of the ordinance. Now, that's something that I think would be, I'd put that in the range of somewhat effective, because they're in a uniform, but so that people can see that there's an official capacity there, but they're not police officers. So I kind of see that as an intermediary step to try before we get to a discussion on enforcement. Because obviously, if we're thinking of enforcement, we have to just sort of be able to accept the challenges that go with it.
Yeah. Can you run us through some of those challenges?
I certainly can, and the chief can jump in, but
Yeah,
obviously if we say that we want our officers to enforce that, even if it's for a minor violation, if an officer approaches someone and says, let's see your identification as a mask ordinance, I'm going to write you a citation, and someone refuses, walks away, doesn't give their information, that person may be subject to an arrest. And then we get into the challenge that now we're getting into a more serious interaction over a more minor issue. And that has to just be something that council certainly would be comfortable with, because I think that that's a little bit the opposite of what we've heard over the prior months. Chief Johnson, is that accurate, that if we were going to issue citations to people for masks and we were to approach people, they were not to comply, walk away, not give ID, what would our officers have to do at that point? What would their response be?
Well, they have two options. They can, the person's being disorderly conduct reference, they're not applying, going with a lawful order of a police officer. So that's an arrestable offense, which becomes a misdemeanor. Initially, we were in a civil infraction situation. Now it turns into a misdemeanor. The officer can arrest with a misdemeanor committed in their presence, or we can somehow seek a warrant later on. But the officer has to be a discussion, because the officer is in a position, do we let them not comply with the rule and not arrest them? Or do we arrest or seek some kind of compliance from that standpoint? So it's we expect the same thing with this with the new public health order. Also, the fine is $500, and we're expecting some blowback with the homeowners, also with the residents in these large parties. But we're already working on contingency plans where we're going to be able to work on citing them at a later date, probably the next date, or going through other ways to get their information without having to deal with a hands-on type of confrontation the night of. So we're really working on this public health new ordinance. We have a decent plan in place for that. But as Mr. Lahanas was talking about, the on-street mask wearing, that's going to be a call that we have to decide to make on that particular person at that particular time. And I don't know what the answer is going to be, but it will put us in a predicament sometimes when people don't want to comply for a civil infraction in violation wearing a mask.
Your Honor, I got to step away for just one moment. I have a child emergency. I'll be right back.
Absolutely. Just to go, I'll get to you in a second, Mayor Pro Tem, but yeah, I mean, just to speak to the issue a little bit more, what you're talking about here is really kind of an impossible situation for some of our officers too, because you have a situation where, let's say there's 50 people downtown, 40 of them aren't wearing a mask, right? Do you cite the one person and then tell everybody, stay in place, right? We're going to give you all tickets. And then, you have to assess the situation. And I suppose you experienced it to a certain extent this weekend, but I myself have been walking around trying to hand out masks, and I'll tell you very firsthand, if somebody's not willing to put on a piece of cloth over their face, it's very unlikely they're willing to give you their ID to have you write them a ticket, right? And so, and I mean, that's just kind of like a logic thing at that point, and I'm lucky that I have not experienced anything too hostile, but let's say when you have a situation where you're asking somebody to wear a mask and they might be intoxicated. I have definitely had occurrences myself, not as not somebody that's not uniformed, not somebody that is an officer certainly, but just somebody that is attempting to, inform people of a new rule, where I was a little bit worried about my own safety. And I will be very, very frank about that. So, it is kind of a difficult situation here. And so I do think what the city manager said in terms of getting those resource officers that are unarmed but that are uniformed to actually be actively walking up to people and informing them of the rule is something that I think is a good step going forward. And I'm not really willing to go all the way to the point where we have to have maybe some more difficult confrontations where I can't see a situation where you're giving a ticket to one person, right? And there's another person walking by not wearing a mask and the person goes, well, what about that person? They say, well, they're breaking the rule too. We'll track them down, right?
We also are having, as you are aware, we having our foot beat downtown on weekends, and we have especially with football season coming up, we got 4 to 6 officers down there in uniform, but we also we're trying to be ambassadors also. We're putting people down there who are trying to engage the citizens walking down there and try and politely tell them the same thing: put your mask on, things of that nature. Not confrontational, but we have 4 to 6 officers down there Friday night and Saturday night, especially in this fall, to help with that. And so I think hopefully the more people asking for compliance may help us also.
Yeah. So other council members' opinions on that. I mean, we can have this conversation in a more formal way if council members want to request it. But at this point, I think that's an appropriate change going forward, and hoping to see the results. So other council members' thoughts? Councilmember Watson, and then Mayor Pro Tem. Sorry.
So what did you call the mask fine, the $25? Did you say that was a fine, a civil fine?
Civil infraction.
Say again?
Civil infraction.
Civil infraction. All right. And so it hasn't really been handed out though?
No, we have not been.
Okay, but the fines more likely, the $500 fine more likely will be, and we'll get information on just kind of what's happening with those fines.
Yep. All right, go ahead, Chief. Yeah.
No, that's correct. That's correct. We'll keep track of those, the tickets that we'll be issuing under the public health order, and we'll get that information to you.
And also, if I could ask Mr. Homier, I don't think that we set the fines. I think the court sets the fines up to $500. Is that right?
Yeah, we approached this one a little different, and we did set the fine at $500.
All right. And we talked about the neighborhood specialists, and I just became curious. Are they going to have body cams on them also?
Yes, I think our impression is they're going to have body cams. Chief, did you want to? I think we discussed that earlier, but I don't know if we've discussed it recently about them having, because our PACE officers do have body cams, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And we plan on having them on them also.
Great.
So when I think about the mask thing, as we've been talking, I also thought about like those ticket days, those seatbelt days where you are routine, everyone's like pulled over, so could that, I'm not saying find folks that aren't wearing masks, and I do believe that it's hard, but it makes me think about the seatbelt days where everyone's pulled over, or however it goes with whoever's pulled over and unlucky and ends up getting it because they know that, that they're supposed to be doing it, wearing their seatbelt or wearing their mask. I'm a jogger, I'm a walker. I'm lucky to be in an area where if I turn the corner, I'm supposed to have my mask on, but I don't always turn that corner. And so it's hard to think about doling out tickets to people that are running or walking or whatever it is that they're doing, or figuring out the right time to do that. Like we talked about nighttime, it heats up, but our caller was talking about daytime when they're seeing those runners, et cetera.
And exercising, by the way, is excluded from the mask order. As a.
Oh, I'm good. Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to read that out. Okay, good. That's good to know. And that goes into my last question. Does that include like basketball playing and?
Yep. I actually have somewhat of an example of that even. So I was out walking around probably about a week and a half ago, I want to say. I was in Valley Court Park. There were some folks that were playing basketball, and then there were some folks that were watching them on the side. And I walked up to the folks that were watching them on the side, and I informed them, "Hey, you're a group of people. If you're not part of the same household, you guys should be wearing a mask." And I pointed to the folks that were playing basketball. I said, "These guys are actively exercising right now, and they're not required to, but you should be wearing one." Just because you're in close proximity. I'd say that's kind of your difference.
Good, thank you, everyone.
Go ahead. Sorry, Mayor Pro Tem first, and then Councilmember Babcock. I skipped over her again.
I was sitting in on the RHC meeting this afternoon, and they had some concerns about this. which I honestly hadn't thought about before. So the way that this ordinance is written, it's just health orders, emergency health orders. And there are emergency health orders that apply to restaurants. That is not how we have ever discussed enforcing this, but I believe the way this is written, we could theoretically go into a restaurant that was over its 50% capacity and cite them. I attempted to reassure that group somewhat that we still at the moment planned to leave enforcement of the restaurants in the county health officers' hands. I hope that I wasn't incorrect with that. If not, I'll have to call them up and give them an apology. But the concern was who gets the ticket. So, and I guess this applies to house parties as well. So this is going to individuals or to property owners?
We are looking, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Right now, our plan is to cite one of the residents at the house.
Okay.
And that's our main priority at the time of occurrence. And if they decide not to cooperate and things like that, we're not going to be trying to force that issue that particular night. We'll take another step the next day and deal with them in the daylight when they're sober, or maybe deal with the owner of the home too, to make sure we get the right identification of those individuals. We really don't want to force the issue that at night. But our main plan is to invite them, the person who have contact that particular night.
And have we speculated on a possibility that this could be used in businesses, or is this primarily at the moment our plan is to use this in private residences?
Go ahead, George.
The plan is for private residences, but it could be used of any health order. So I think that's the way it's written. And if we have problems with anything, I think we should keep open that we would enforce it. You know, obviously we saw this past summer a tremendous super spreader event from a downtown business. And I think if there's violations, we should take the enforcement needed to keep the community safe. That's not the intent, is to go in and be counting people in restaurants. But I think if there was some egregious violation, I don't know why I'd want to remove the possibility of that.
Yeah, I think that's the phrase I actually used in the meeting, was egregious violation. I was specifically talking about repeat violators who had been warned, and that, you know, like if we have not had this, I actually think our downtown businesses by and large are doing a pretty good job about controlling the insides of their establishments. But if, hypothetically speaking, there was an imaginary business owner that just, you know, flagrantly violated the occupancy order, and after being warned continued to do so, then that's an instance that I would see that it would be appropriate. So I don't see it being used kind of as an immediate response against business owners anyway.
Actually, the mayor and I, to that point, walked around on Friday evening. As we mentioned, later in the evening, we walked to about probably 6 or 7 licensed establishments and observed. The servers all had masks on. People were all sitting at tables, no one standing. I thought and they did, the space between the table looked good. I didn't have a single concern about a single restaurant from what we could observe. And we walked literally, I think, to 7 different restaurants in the downtown. So I felt pretty good about their compliance at that point, and that they're doing the right thing. We even made contact and talked to a couple of front door people / managers, and felt pretty good about what they were doing. That's not a scientific survey, but just that we were observing and saw, I thought, pretty good behavior.
Yeah. Mr. Homer, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we also draft this, if you look at section 6 under the violations, that not only does it include the civil infraction fine, but under the revised Judicature Act, specifically under Chapter 87 involving municipal civil infractions, there is the possibility too, particularly on repeat offenders, maybe not on a first offense, that the court has the ability to issue a injunctive relief. So when you issue injunctive relief, then it becomes a court order. So if there are, say, repeat violations and the court does grant an injunctive order prohibiting violations of that, then it would subject that owner as well to civil contempt.
Yeah. And I imagine that that is not something that people want to see. So let's hope that this is not, we don't see many repeat offenders from this ordinance, although I will say that there have been a couple of repeats in our city thus far. So Yeah, I know. And I think, by the way, I just want to say the way that this is written, I do think it's important just because, while we do have emergency response here at the city, and obviously we've been, and our staff have been working tirelessly to try and, control and really stop the spread. Our health officer has as well. And, wording this as though whatever orders the health officer puts in place is a violation for us is important, because even as the city manager was talking about limiting that number from 25 to 10, we're not putting it in place to say that 25 people now is the $500 fine. We're saying that the public health order is the $500 fine. So if that public health order changes from 25 outside to 10 outside, the same rule applies. And so I think that that's important because we want to be able to be consistent with our public health officials. Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. So essentially, we're not going to enforce the mask order at all at this time.
I think we're going to continue to educate and encourage people. Unless we hear different direction from council. Obviously, that's, that was what I heard from council initially, and that was the plan. But if council wants to give us different direction, that certainly is something we would work to implement. I would have slight concern over it because, again, we're going to have lots of interactions with people who may be walking away, maybe just, ignoring the officer, and then we're back into the arrest for a low-level civil infraction becoming something more serious. So, but I'd hear council's direction on that.
I would say, and I said this before, the direction that I'm hearing from having the unarmed neighborhood resource specialists out in the downtown informing people directly is a good step in the right direction. But I'm happy to hear from other council members on that, but I wouldn't be supportive at this point of having folks arrested over this if they don't comply. So.
Well, in fairness, they wouldn't be arrested for this. They'd be arrested for disobeying the order. But I understand how that would snowball. I am disappointed, though, after having been downtown last week, I am disappointed that we aren't going to do something to enforce the mask order. And perhaps that's something to consider is whether something to continue to look at, see if we can do it in a way that won't accelerate. I understand the arguments against acceleration and I agree with them, but I also see people just flouting it, and they're endangering us all. They're making us all look bad. I also listened in on the RHC call this afternoon, and their question was, I thought rather pointedly, what's the city going to do about this? People not wearing masks, particularly people standing in line on the public sidewalk. So, Chief Johnson? Don't mean to put you on the spot. I just didn't have an answer, so I thought somebody's got to.
We're just going to be working through it. The more we can advise and educate, I think that's the best route for us right now. And for us to, the restaurants have to abide by those same rules when it comes to the lines. And so we will help them enforce those also. But we are going to do our best to, try and keep the restaurants in line and try and keep everyone else masked up as best as we can right now. I think that's the best we can do at the moment until we get further direction.
Yeah, we actually can have the downtown, the council can put an order in place regarding the absence of lines. But that again gets to enforcement and so on. And I think that, talking to Linda Vale, I talked to her before going into the downtown on Friday. I talked to her leaving the downtown on Friday night because, as the mayor mentioned, she's actually working all the time like many of us. And she said, I'm more concerned with mask wearing in the establishments and the people are behaving properly in the establishments than when they're outside and they're somewhat distanced. So if you were to have people without masks walking around in the downtown, I think that that's an area of slightly lesser concern. I think it has a good learning, curve and good sort of, remembering that sort of muscle memory, if you will, that people should be wearing their masks. But we understand that interior and in the sort of collected groups is where it's most likely to spread, not in walking in the downtown. But I think it is something we want to sort of continue to work on.
Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Just one last thing. We keep talking about education, and it's kind of like seating a jury for the OJ trial. I mean, I don't know where in the world you'd have to be to have not seen that. Well, perhaps in utero. Perhaps some of you are young enough. Sorry, Mayor. Even you have seen the clip of the Bronco driving up the freeway, right? So we keep talking about, well, we need to educate them. Look, it can't be any clearer. So that's beginning to wear thin with me. And I know we're all being diplomatic, but when people are like, oh, I didn't know. If you were able to attend a major research university, chances are, you're supposed to be wearing a mask.
Yeah, no,
that's it.
Councilmember Babcock, to your point, I understand what you're saying, but on the council level, it's really a decision on our end on whether or not we want to see an arrest over the mask, right? Councilmember Bacon, I'll get to you right after, but that's the decision, right? I think we all understand that education isn't enough. I mean, that's why this item is on the agenda here. And I agree 100% with having folks downtown continuously informing and telling people that they need to be wearing a mask in our downtown. But I would agree with the city manager in the sense that this is going to put us in really, really untenable situations.
I know, I agree.
But, and I understand they want that. And I wish that there was a situation where, the person that isn't wearing the mask, once an officer asks for that ID, to give them a ticket, they're going to be like, oh, sure, 100%. I am happy to pay this fine for my constitutional right. But that's just not how it's going to happen. And I think we need to be realistic with that. And so that decision has to be made on our level. And I'm more comfortable in our city when we are going through a time of great reform in terms of public safety to continue education on this and ramp up the education, let's say, even further than I am with the other alternative. Councilmember Bacon, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with the desire to enforce, but it's literally diametrically opposed to what we're doing on the other side and asking law enforcement to do. And from both sides, we're exposing them to undue, encounters, and we're exposing the public to unnecessary, possibly escalatable encounter. It's just we can't have it both ways. Right. I think we already made this selection to try to tone down these types of encounters in the first place. So they're not even just opposed. They're literally polar opposites of what we've been trying to do, in my opinion, even though my desire would be to slap a mask on everyone. But we can't have it both ways.
Right. So. Mayor Pro Tem.
So I understand the security and the comfort that is offered by walking around downtown and seeing everyone wearing masks. And I would love to see everyone downtown wearing masks. But I think that we have the evidence to show that the place that Corona is spreading in our community is not through our businesses and not through people walking through downtown, but is pretty much directly linked to large private house parties. And we now have seen that Corona spread jump from our young people to the rest of the community. We have got an increasing number of non-student hospitalizations.
Absolutely.
And so I think the most important place to concentrate our enforcement and the most important place to concentrate our effort right now is with the parties at the private residences. And I think I am encouraged to hear Chief Johnson that our police officers are at least asking people to wear masks and reminding people to wear masks. That is something that is all I've ever wanted. So I'm very glad to hear that that's happening. But really, in terms of enforcement, I want to see it focused on those private parties. So yep. I think we've got the ability to do that. I think that taking that effort would have an immediate improvement in community spread. So,
yep. And so I'm gonna try and bring us back on to the subject at hand because it is 9:20 and I want to be cognizant of folks' time. So I am going to move adoption of Emergency Ordinance 1496, an ordinance requiring compliance with public health orders, and I will ask for a second. Seconded by, I'm going to say Councilmember Bacon because you guys said it at the same time.
Cool. That's fine.
and I will speak on my motion. This is important. We've reiterated this 1,000 different times. We're at the point where education has not been sufficient for certain very, very small percentage of population in East Lansing. That population of East Lansing is going to contribute to sickness. It's already contributed to hospitalizations. I told the city manager I don't sleep much nowadays because I am terrified of the calls that we are going to get because somebody got a case in East Lansing and didn't get to go home from the hospital. And I hope that that kind of statement is met with the gravity that it deserves, because that's the situation that we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a preference. We're not dealing with something that is unique to this city. We're dealing with something where people's lives are at stake. And there needs to be the level of importance on that I think every member of this community should have. So I'm happy that we've been working with our public health officials and MSU and all these different agencies and community members that are all doing the right thing. So many people doing the right thing, but a small portion of the population is going to take that work and throw it down the drain. And so I am happy to have this ordinance in place now. And I'm proud to be the one moving it, even though I understand completely the gravity of something like this being done. So with that, any other comments? Wonderful. I'm going to ask for a roll call vote on this ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Bacon,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Greg,
Yes.
and Mayor Stevens.
Yes. Thank you very much. That motion passed unanimously. We are now on to item 4.3, but I will ask for a 5-minute break so folks can get up, get water, grab coffee, whatever they need to do. I will ask that people are back at 9:32 p.m. Thanks. I'll see you in a little bit. All right, it's 9:32. Let's move on without him.
All set?
Just kidding. We're just waiting for Lisa. Jesse, I find it funny that comment that you made about the energy drinks in the office made it into the article. Wow.
Did it? I didn't see the article. Send it to me. Was it the one where I said that you were making a fort out of Monster can?
That's pretty funny. That one, and I think somebody calling me a douche when I asked them to wear a mask was the two favorite quotes that have ever been put in.
Pulled out, bold. Yeah, excellent. Well reported then. Good job, media.
Interesting times. Great, we have everybody back. Our next item on the agenda is strategic priorities update. Mr. Lahanas.
Okay, so this is hopefully our final look at strategic priorities. On August 24th, we went through the strategic priorities in detail, going through all of the priorities and having a good discussion about it. At this point, we said we would give council some time to review that and take anything that you want to consider about it, come back and have a conversation, and then move forward hopefully next week to approve them. I can switch to the priorities and pull them up just for a moment. I'm not going to go through the presentation at this point unless you have specific questions. Can you go to the first page that just shows the priorities? Second page. There. So obviously, we know that these are the 6 priorities, as I mentioned, the same as the 5 priorities, except recreational cultural opportunities and enhanced infrastructure basically have been a split from enhanced public infrastructure. So really, they're all the same that they were before, which has lots of continuity. We had a chance, like I said, to go through all of the underlying detail to these. If council wants to see any of that detail, ask me any questions. We certainly can do our best to answer those questions. We had one item that we added, and I'll read that out loud, was from Mayor Pro Tem Greg wanted to add one regarding historic districts, and that was added to strong, safe communities. There we see it. Thank you. Wow, that was quick. Explore grant funding availability and programs to defray costs of homeowners in historic districts. So this is just getting to the issue of seeing if staff can do a review to find if there are any viable programs that we can implement. So that was to Jesse's question. And that was the only addition since our last meeting. So if council has any other questions or additions for us, we don't need to have a long conversation on this because, like I said, we went through it in detail on August 24, but we're available to answer your questions. Otherwise, I would just request that we bring it next week for final approval.
Can you, George, can you bump over to highlight the vibrant economy and economic, oh my God, my brain is like shut off. One of the things that occurred to me during the whole shutdown and with everyone working remotely, and especially with all of the children doing remote school, is the idea of just really addressing our technology infrastructure as part of our vibrant economy. Yep. And I wasn't sure that that was in there.
So you're thinking about like the fiber backbone to the downtown? Is that the issue? Because I think
just broadband data infrastructure, making sure that the high-tech companies that we're trying to attract have the infrastructure that they need to operate, but then also this idea that we do have so many people working from home, and we have the ability, because comparatively to some of the big urban centers, the coastal urban centers, we have a much lower cost of living, although our residents might not feel that. But so, with remote work, we have the opportunity to kind of attract some people who are working in much different economic centers. And I don't know if we have a plan for data infrastructure and technology infrastructure. So that was the only thing that had occurred to me since our.
I put one to say that we would examine the availability of high-speed internet throughout the city, and just to see if it's pervasive enough, because obviously we know we have some of the large competing brands. We also have the new MetroNet that has been going into neighborhoods, but we can certainly put that as one to just sort of map out and see what the availability of high-speed internet is throughout the community. And then that could lead to the issue of further work down the future if there's ways that we need to incent or do anything else beyond that.
Yeah, and then just making sure that our planning and approval and permitting process is up to date with modern codes, because that moves very quickly when technology is involved.
Do we have Tom Fahrenbach on the line, or Scott? Do either of you want to comment on that? I know it gets into the intersection of economic development, but also utilities.
It does. And I think it's prudent to investigate that further and ensure that, especially as we look to some of the types of companies we'd like to attract, like the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, that backbone infrastructure is critical.
We will add something to that.
Okay, that was the only thing that had occurred to me since our last discussion.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a few, but I'm willing to wait for other folks to go first if necessary. If not, I can go. Maybe people can formulate the thoughts. So, we obviously have a priority in, and I'm trying to find where it actually says it. Maximizing use of our parking supply in our downtown under economy and development. I know our parking task force was reestablished moving forward, but obviously things have been postponed to a certain degree due to COVID. And so I do want to put a plug in there for a specific priority on the movement towards more people living downtown, more people working downtown, and what that looks like going forward. I mean, I know we touched on it when we were talking about the evergreen properties, but I do think that needs to be involved in the discussion with our priorities, because we are going to see a changing parking system in our downtown that's going to satisfy different needs, I think, for our community.
I could just jump into that, Mayor. So I think that our plan, of course, was to do the parking study, which probably would get at some of these issues put off for COVID. But I think as we return to normalcy, hopefully next semester and beyond, is to move forward with that parking study and get us a lot of that data.
Okay.
Tom, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think that's accurate. We are currently engaged in a count right now to get some granular data, and I think we're planning on spinning up the parking task force again in November to chew on some recommendations in the short term that then we can bring back to council. I think for your discussion only meeting on I want to say the 17th of November is the target there.
Right.
Also, we're holding off on expenses, but we did have the study budgeted, but we've just held off on it at this point, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it's in the budget, but we're trying to reduce any non-necessary expenditures at the moment, given the situation we're in from a revenues perspective. And then I think what we will need to do, as was mentioned, I think earlier this evening, is really look at any and all creative strategies to, rethink parking during this time.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. In terms of good governance, obviously increasing transparency is a huge issue, not only for the council, but for the city as a whole. I think one area that we really can put a highlight on this, and things that we've done in the past that are really positive, is in terms of our budget. Budgets are not as easily digestible for your average citizen. That's why we contracted with a different firm that kind of set our budget in, I think, a more digestible way. But I continue to ask for things like even having on our website, right, where income tax dollars are going, which is difficult, of course, to do sometimes. But I think things like that are cool. I think things like that are important, and I think it just increases the amount of community awareness on where tax dollars are going. I do think that's important, and it is very difficult to take what is a giant budget and somewhat surmise it down into a way that, somebody that is not spending maybe their entire weekend like I do, going through it line by line. But I do think increased budget transparency is important, and that sometimes means somewhat trying to communicate in a more general way, where money are going to, where priorities are. And I touch on even the difference between, where street funding and infrastructure funding is going, right? And the different pots that, you might be doing sewer improvements, you might be doing, local street improvements, how many miles you're actually able to do with a certain amount of money. All of those conversations are things that I tend to have with residents, and I'm happy to do that, absolutely. But, even if I could point to something on the website that explains, some of those maybe more nuanced points. And of course, I'm given basically guidance on this giant document, right? And I'm giving you like one tiny specific example, but, interesting ways that we can try to increase, the amount of community involvement around our budget, I think should be a priority specifically for transparency.
That was a great segue, Mayor. I couldn't have paid you like to do
Okay.
it.
All right.
Priority-based budgeting. We are in the midst of our second year update to priority-based budgeting, which will make it, it's amazingly easy. It's linked to these priorities under the same organization, and you'll be able to click through the boxes in a graphical way and see what departments are spending money on what programs. And you can sort of just visually see. I wish I could pull it up, but maybe we'll do that at a later meeting. We had a great presentation, I thought, in last February on it. This will have the new data. So once the new data is up, we can do that again. But I think that is probably the most user-friendly way to show a connection between what you want as an outcome and where we're spending our money to get those outcomes. And I think that's a great tool for transparency. So I'm glad you mentioned that. We're in the midst of the update now, and that work is underway.
All right, well, great to hear. I knew that we obviously had gone with priority-based budgeting. I guess maybe I missed the specific note on the priorities with it. And if I did, then I apologize. But yeah, that was
just a perfect segue. So thank you for that.
Great to hear. So I do think that as well, as we're going through a process of kind of updating different codes, and actually Mayor Pro Tem Greg touched on fees a little bit. I would like to maybe even have a conversation about like ordinance fines, fees that we're assessing generally to maybe even businesses, rental licenses, those kind of things that have been in place for a really long time, and possibly even reassessing whether that rate is what we really want to be at. And, maybe even the reasoning behind that. Maybe that is a conversation that we have during our budget process, but I do feel like during our budget process, the fee schedule is always something that's kind of talked about at the end. And it might not it doesn't necessarily always have the weight that I think it deserves, because that is like what we're charging people to do things in our city. And so I just, maybe an updated conversation on that to council in the future, and some staff consideration over time on that specific item would be cool. Yeah, that is, I think, the thoughts that I had originally. Besides that, I understand that there's many different priorities that are on hold due to COVID. Just would really love to know, where the priority list is on moving forward with some of these things. Obviously, you touched on parking a little bit, but some of these other priorities that obviously we do want to see, and they've been priorities for this council, whether it's myself on the council or not for a long period of time. But I appreciate the work that was put into this so far. I appreciate the updates that have been done to councils in the past on how we are doing on the strategic priorities, and maybe even having those at a council meeting too. I know that we tended to get like updates via email, but I wouldn't even mind, a short presentation on some priority areas that we've done on a, even a quarterly or biannual basis. I think would be cool. So those are the thoughts that I have as we're going. And I think that's really about it that I have at this point. So other council members?
Quick comment. One of the benefits that I've seen of the virtual meeting format that we've been sort of forced into for the last 8 months is that even we have kind of our big 3 commissions. We have, planning commission, DDA, and then, council meetings that are kind of the most watched meetings. But I have really appreciated the chance to tune into some of our other commission meetings, because everything is archived, because these Zoom meetings are so easy to record. And I do know that there's a pretty hefty fee involved with televising. So I'm certainly not suggesting that we televise like the Arts Commission meeting, although it would be fun. It's a great meeting. But even audio recording, I don't know how we could do that going forward, but to kind of continue that level of accessibility in some of our less well-attended commission meetings, because to me, that's been a great benefit of this in a very dark period of time. So.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I literally could not read my own handwriting. That is, I wrote that down, and that's why I paused for a second. So I apologize. This is
I got your back, bro. No worries.
Notes from like last week when I was in the office. No, I do think that in a and as we were talking about it earlier, today, virtual meetings has increased participation in this city. It's increased transparency. I think it's increased the amount of oversight that this council has. I think that it's increased really just the general knowledge of what is going on in the city from a council level. So any way that we can incorporate that in a non-COVID environment, I think is helpful. And so I don't know what that looks like. I'm not giving direction right now specifically on any item, but the fact that people can call in right now and we are able to hear their responses and input is really, really great. So different means for people to get involved is a cool thing. And I would add that onto the good governance side.
Just quick point too, it's also, I think the virtual format, especially some of the meetings that have our committees that have people who are, full-time workers and parents and things, the flexibility of being able to attend a meeting virtually has been pretty great for quality of life for some of our commissioners that balance a lot of responsibilities. So
George, sorry.
I just want to mention the one concern with that has been the positive. The negative has been it has taken twice the staff support to run every meeting, and it is wearing people out. When I think of the planning department, Tom is supporting, and his staff support, I think it's a dozen commissions, and it takes a lot of people. That's the only caveat. And I do agree with you that the accessibility of it has been better, but on the flip side, it is draining and demanding because extra staff have to sit through extra meetings that they normally wouldn't have to sit through. So that's the only caveat on that, but something we can certainly consider and look for as we go forward.
Yeah, something to consider. And, if it even if it's just on the council level, maybe I understand now the extra concern, and I know there's an increased cost as well with that. So just something to put there as maybe a council, but yeah. Other thoughts from council members? Great. All right, George, then I will look for this on our agenda in the coming weeks. I appreciate your time on this and your effort.
Thank you. Thanks, council members.
Thank you. All right, our next item on the agenda is item 4.4, was on the consent agenda, approving a conflict waiver for Foster Swift to represent the city in the sale of real estate at MSUFCU. I'm going to pass this over to Mr. Homier, unless Councilmember Babcock, you had said that you just wanted to hear about it. Is there something specific that you wanted to ask before the item came up, or did you just want to hear kind of an explanation?
As you see me frantically stabbing at my screen, I just wanted, because Mr. Homier is new to us, I think he's doing a great job. But if I were a member of the public and I looked down and thought, gosh, this is the big issue that's facing them, and 2 weeks in, we've got a potential conflict of interest, I just thought I'd let you explain that. I'm fine with it, but I just think as a matter of housekeeping, we'll let you explain what the conflict is and how you're resolving it, and whether you anticipate any similar conflicts in the future.
Great.
So it's hard for me to predict similar conflicts in the future. The firm has roughly 30,000 different clients. So we have a robust conflict check system. So as you know, we came in sort of at the end of this. We were not involved at all in negotiating the terms of the deal. Really, we are just shepherding this through the closing. The purchase agreement and the terms of the deal were previously negotiated between the city and MSUFCU. We do unrelated work for MSUFCU, mostly in the area of loan approvals and work like that. The real estate lawyer that I have at the firm working with me on this is Scott Hogan. Scott Hogan has never done any work for MSUFCU, neither have I for that matter. So these are totally unrelated matters. Although I will say that the general counsel for MSUFCU is a former colleague of mine from Foster Swift who left the firm a number of years ago and went to MSUFCU. So immediately when we recognized it involved MSUFCU, we knew we had a conflict. We reached out to Steve Owen at MSUFCU, advised him of the conflict. I did the same with the city manager, advised him of the conflict, and then produced these waiver letters, both for MSUFCU, who has already executed that and returned it. It is substantially identical as the one that you have in front of you. And there are a couple things that we have to comply with under the rules of professional conduct, specifically Rule 1.7. So one is that we do not believe that our representation of the city would be adversely affected, nor do we believe that our representation of MSUFCU would be adversely affected either, because again, these are unrelated matters to which we represent either one of you, and that we consult with and obtain your consent to that. So that's the basis of this. We're really just involved in making sure that this matter gets to the closing. And I will say we expect that on the 20th of October, you will have a resolution, because one of the things that we discovered was Albert has not been realigned as required by the title insurance. So we have to have a resolution that will do that, and we're working on that now. But that required us to get a legal description of that portion where it needs to be realigned. And so we're sort of dotting those I's, crossing those T's to make sure that it gets closed appropriately.
Yeah, go ahead.
And will this be your process in the future? With 30,000 clients, we should all be so lucky, right? With 30,000 clients, if future conflicts come up, will this be your process in the future?
Yeah, so for any individual matter, we immediately run through our conflicts checks to identify whether or not we have a conflict, and then whether or not it's a waivable conflict, because not all conflicts are waivable. And so we certainly adhere to our ethical obligation to disclose those conflicts when and if they come up. And then if we can resolve them, like in this case, then we try and resolve those. And like I said, MSUFCU was gracious enough to also understand that, sign the execution of waiver and return it to us.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, is there any more discussion or on this item, or if not, I'll entertain a motion.
This is kind of an embarrassing question. What should the motion say? Just that we accept the conflict letter?
The motion would be to approve a conflict waiver for Foster Swift to represent the city in the sale of real estate to MSUFCU.
And
So-
I would just add to that to authorize the city manager to execute the same.
So moved.
Seconded by the mayor pro tem. All right, any discussion? Great, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Wonderful. That is our last item on the agenda. I will request again that those presentations that were given to council are put on the agenda on our online portal. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for the staff that are sticking with us. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.
Night all. Thank you.